According to statistics, approximately 30% of violent crimes committed around the world remain unsolved, despite the rapid development of technology and techniques, as well as the creation of extensive DNA databases. As a rule, most of these crimes are solved on hot tracks, but there are cases when the investigation lasts for years or even decades before the perpetrator is punished. But the Ellen Ray Greenberg case, which we will look at in this video, is interesting in that for many years of investigation, it has hardly moved forward. The case has been investigated with numerous irregularities, and over time, there are more questions than answers. The brutal murder of a young woman to this day remains a mystery, and what is remarkable is that the investigation is trying hard to prove that the cheerful Ellen, who was enthusiastically preparing for her own wedding, suddenly decided to leave her life. But let's try to understand everything in order. Who is Ellen Ray Greenberg? Ellen was born in New York in June 1993 in the family of Sanna and George Greenberg. She was the only child of her parents, growing up in love and care. During high school, the girl was actively engaged in team sports and even gave hope as a promising athlete. She was an active, restless, and sociable child, but at the same time studied well, showing a special interest in the humanities. After graduating from high school, Ellen became a student at Pennsylvania State University, where she received a degree in public relations. But having started working on a specialty, Greenberg realized that this is not what she would like to devote her life to. Parallel to work, the girl enrolled in the correspondence department of the Pedagogical Institute. A few years later, she brilliantly defended her diploma and moved to Philadelphia, where she was hired to work in one of the local schools as a junior high school teacher. According to relatives, Ellen's life was going great. She was full of enthusiasm, made big plans for the future, and simply adored her work and small students. At the same time, Ellen met a boy with whom she had a torrid affair, and soon they began to prepare for their wedding. The girl's favorite was a young man named Samuel, or just Sam, Goldberg. He was from a fairly wealthy and well-known family in the city. His parents owned their own large business, and his uncle had a reputation as one of the best lawyers in the state. The young men met in 2009 at a party, thanks to their mutual acquaintances, and immediately liked each other. The friendly interaction quickly turned into a rapidly developing romantic relationship, and soon they decided to move in together and live together. On the eve of 2011, Sam made his beloved a proposal, which was the best gift for the new year. He gave her a beautiful diamond ring, and the couple began to prepare for the upcoming wedding, which was scheduled for the spring of the same year. Family members of both young people took the news with joy, and it seemed that the happiness of lovers can no longer interfere with anything. Ellen plunged headlong into the pleasant troubles associated with the wedding, making lists of guests and sending them invitations, choosing a venue and elements of decor for the event, trying on wedding dresses, trying to create their ideal image, and planning a honeymoon. It is noteworthy that almost all these issues the bride was engaged in independently, and the groom did not visibly participate in the process. But loved ones did not attach much importance to this, and Helen never complained. True, there were some oddities, to which everyone paid attention only after the tragedy occurred. In January 2011, the weather in the city was very snowy and frosty. On the 26th, Ellen went to work at school as usual. But close to noon, there was a strong wind and a blizzard, so classes were canceled and students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to the apartment she and Sam shared. It was in a cozy apartment complex located in one of the quiet areas of the city. Soon Sam returned home as well. According to some reports, the couple that day quarreled, which was mentioned in passing, and Sam himself, but later he began to deny it. Close to 5 p.m., Sam decided to go to the gym located in the same apartment complex. He was gone for less than 1 hour, but when he returned, he could not get into the apartment because the door was locked from the inside. Sam first knocked loudly and insistently, then began calling his fiancée by name, which attracted the attention of neighbors, and then began calling her on the phone and sending messages. No one responded to his yelling, knocking, and calling, but it was heard that the phone was inside the apartment. Sam then went to the first floor of the building to the security guard to ask for help. Samuel explained the situation to him and asked if it was possible to open the front door, to which the guard replied that this was beyond his authority and that he could not leave his post by instruction. Then Sam went back up to his floor and decided to act on his own. He slammed his shoulder into the door, and the first time he did it, he managed to break the latch. It was quiet inside, Ellen's call was never answered, and when he entered the kitchen, he saw a gruesome sight. His fiancée was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the cabinet door, her body slashed with a knife and her clothes stained with blood. Sam immediately started calling emergency services, describing the situation, and when asked to check if the girl had a pulse, he acted strangely, asking several times if he really needed to do that. Then there was silence, and afterward Sam suddenly stated that there was a knife sticking out in his fiancée's chest, which, allegedly, he had not noticed before. He also added that Ellen was obviously already dead. The police officers who arrived on the call were quite surprised, and noted that they had never seen such a thing in their many years of practice. The door was indeed locked from the inside with a latch, which Sam had subsequently knocked off with his shoulder. There were no signs of forced entry or the presence of intruders in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment. All valuables and money were still there. Nothing had been searched or touched. But the most interesting thing began when the body of the dead girl was examined. No signs of struggle or attempts to defend herself were found, as if everything happened suddenly and the victim simply did not have time to react. On her body counted about 24 stab wounds of varying depth, and the final blow came to the heart, and it took Ellen's life. We will return to the blatant negligence with which the crime scene and the body of the deceased were examined a little later. This negligence allowed a lot of evidence to be missed and left a possible perpetrator at large. But even more strange was the behavior of the police, who even before the medical examination thought that Ellen had done this to herself. Panic attacks, visits to a psychologist, and prescription drugs. In favor of the version of voluntary departure from life was the fact that Ellen, since some time, began to suffer from anxiety disorder and panic attacks arising on its background. The situation was so serious that Ellen even sought help from a psychologist. Close, she tried not to complain, so as not to worry them, and relatives in turn associated changes in Ellen's behavior with stress and excitement before the wedding. However, the specialist who worked with Ellen prescribed her 2 medications, which she took regularly to combat her anxiety. As the psychologist himself would later report, neither of these drugs, neither together nor separately, could in any way aggravate Ellen's mental state and cause thoughts of death. The specialist also noted that despite her anxiety, the patient never had such thoughts. In addition, Ellen's friends and colleagues noticed that after she and Sam started living together, her behavior began to change. In addition to becoming anxious and restless, Ellen almost stopped making any decisions on her own. In every situation, Ellen would say that she needed to discuss it with her fiancé, that she couldn't give an answer without consulting him. Similar oddities noticed, and parents of the deceased, but every time her daughter tried to complain to them about her difficult emotional state, she added that Sam had nothing to do with it. And 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, drop everything, and return to her parents' house. Her mother was very surprised at her daughter's words, but assured her that she could return home at any time, and her parents would accept her without question. However, Ellen never brought up the subject again. Later, it was hypothesized that after the couple moved in together, Sam began to show violence towards his fiancée, and she was scared, afraid to tell anyone about it. The psychologist Ellen consulted did not confirm or deny this version, but noted that Ellen had difficulty articulating and expressing what she was experiencing and what was bothering her. It was as if she wanted to share something important, but the fear was stronger than that. Oddities and inconsistencies in the case. This unusual case from the very beginning raised a lot of questions, but most interestingly, no one even tried to find answers to them. The carelessness with which the examination of the crime scene and the body was conducted, as well as the expertise, is simply astounding. Many circumstances, facts, and evidence were simply ignored and irretrievably lost, and without them it was impossible to restore the full picture of the incident. To begin with, on the hands of the victim, was not found typical for self-defense injuries, which means that the girl was not trying to defend herself. but at the same time, on her body revealed numerous hematomas, which, judging by the degree of healing she received several weeks ago, the fiancé explained that these are most likely the consequences from playing team sports. However, Ellen's parents assured that their daughter had not visited gyms and playgrounds for a very long time because of the workload at work, as well as active preparations for the wedding. No suicide message was found. Ellen looked like a victim of a brutal massacre, but despite this, almost immediately a version of voluntary departure from life was voiced. Moreover, there were food, spices, and a cutting board on the table in the kitchen. So, according to the logic of the investigators, Ellen started to cook dinner, but suddenly changed her mind and decided to cut herself to death with a knife. Further, as I have already noted, on the body of the victim counted 24 penetrating wounds of varying depth, and forensic examinations showed that 10 of them were inflicted from the back, so if the girl was attacked from behind, and some of them were serious enough, and if they did not kill Ellen immediately, then certainly deprived her of the ability to move and resist. It is simply impossible to inflict such injuries on oneself, and then to stick a knife into one's heart to the hilt, and this caused medical experts to doubt the originally announced cause of death. However, despite this conclusion, the investigation continued to insist on the previous version and refused to initiate criminal proceedings. The main argument was the absence of traces of strangers in the apartment, as well as the absence of signs of self-defense. By the way, there were also some doubts about the possibility of penetration into the apartment, because the latch on the inner part of the door was also very peculiar. It could be closed from the outside, but not completely. If the latch had been closed from the inside all the way, it would have been impossible to break it out with a single blow of the shoulder without damaging the doorway. But, judging by the nature of the damage, it was only partially closed, and it could have been done from outside the door. Although the victim's spouse or partner is usually the prime suspect in such cases, Sam has always remained above suspicion. No charges were brought against him, and it was only on the day of the incident that he was interviewed at the station in the presence of his uncle, who, as already mentioned, was a well-known and influential lawyer. Moreover, the whole picture and sequence of events of that day was reconstructed only according to the words of Sam Goldberg, who at times was confused in his own testimony, but wrote everything off as stress. Neighbors confirmed only that they heard the knocking and screaming of a guy who could not get into the apartment and called his fiancée, but that's all. Sam further claimed during his testimony that he went to the security guard for help, and the guard went upstairs with him and saw him kicking down the door. But the guard denied this information, saying that he had not left his post. Strangely enough, but the investigation did not return to this issue, considering this detail irrelevant. A recording from only one surveillance camera leading to the gym was also checked. It shows Sam walking towards the gym and then walking back. But in the interval between these two events, he could well have gone out through another passage and then returned to the gym in the same way. However, his alibi was not checked, and possible witnesses who could confirm that he had been working out or deny it were not even looked for. Sam did not call the police until an hour later, after he found the door locked and his fiancée unresponsive to knocking and shouting. In addition, the officer who took the call noted that Sam was acting strangely. Despite the fact that he was screaming and wailing, the specialist thought that it was a feigned panic because Samuel was calm enough to answer questions and his voice was not shaking. When he was asked to start resuscitative measures, he first doubted the need to do so, then quieted down, and then, and after all, reported about a knife sticking out of his girlfriend's chest, which earlier he allegedly did not notice. It is noteworthy that before calling the police, the guy called his parents and his lawyer uncle, who arrived at the apartment before the police. To the station to testify, as already mentioned, Sam also went together with his uncle. In addition, the next day Sam went back to the sealed apartment with the same uncle to get some personal belongings and took out all of Ellen's gadgets. They took 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet of the deceased. When the investigation suddenly decided to check these devices a few days later, it turned out that the search queries included topics related to voluntary demise. The police officers who arrived at the scene made only a cursory examination of the scene, and concluded that Ellen had taken her own life. Subsequently, despite the emergence of new details, they refused to change their verdict. The order of the wounds could not be established, but it is certain that the final blow was a blow to the heart. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy found all this very strange, and he decided to conduct his own additional investigation, sending a sample of the spine of the deceased to a highly specialized specialist who could give a conclusion regarding the integrity of the spinal cord. If the spinal cord was damaged, then Ellen would be paralyzed and unable to stab herself in the heart. But soon the expert miraculously changed his mind and abandoned his investigation, stating that according to his report, the spinal cord had not been damaged. However, the conclusion itself was never attached to the case materials. It also didn't bother anyone that with such numerous and extensive wounds on Ellen's body, there was very little blood around, which could indicate that someone had wiped it off. But no one even bothered to look for possible washed-away marks. The luminol used in such cases was simply ignored. The trash cans in the apartment were also not examined, and if there was any evidence in them, they were lost forever. The unhappy parents were informed of the death of their only daughter by the Goldberg family, for they were the first on the scene. Ellen's family lived in another town, a couple 100 miles away from their daughter, but they arrived as quickly as they could. Santa and George couldn't believe what was happening, and flatly denied that Ellen could have taken her own life. But the grief-stricken parents were never given a clear answer to the question of what happened that night with their daughter, only a dry conclusion and refusal to initiate criminal proceedings. Then the Greenbergs decided to conduct their own investigation with the involvement of independent specialists. Soon they were contacted by a private detective who offered his help completely free of charge because he himself wanted to understand this confusing case. The detective studied the materials and came to the conclusion that Ellen's body was moved after her death. This was evidenced by a dried blood trickle from her nose toward her ear. But Ellen was found in a sitting position, so the blood couldn't have traveled that way. He also found smeared stains on the floor, very similar to drag marks. In addition, after a second one, the guard remembered that Sam, who had asked for help, was wearing a tracksuit and said he had come back from the gym, but he was wearing boots. He did not have a bag with a change of shoes with him. But despite the new evidence and witness testimony, the parents of the deceased were again denied a criminal case or further investigation. The Greenbergs were even denied case files, including a recording of Sam's phone call to the police, as well as surveillance footage showing the time he walked toward the gym and then returned from there. 4 years later, a new young officer has joined the county's homicide unit, taking a position as an assistant prosecutor. He had heard about the unsolved, strange case while he was still studying at the university, and now he decided to get materials from the archives and get to the truth. His attention was drawn to the injury to the back of the head, which could be the first to indicate that Ellen had been attacked from behind when she hadn't expected it. Also of interest to him was the note that there was no spinal cord injury, but there was no official document to prove it. All of the ADA's attempts to find any report regarding the spinal injuries were unsuccessful. It was allegedly lost somewhere in the archives. Then he made an official request to the Center of Forensic Medical Examination to get a duplicate of the document. And then it turned out that no one had ever given such a conclusion, and the body was not examined for spinal cord injuries. At the same time, a fragment of the spine had somehow miraculously been preserved and could be re-examined. An independent specialist was brought in and determined that the spinal cord had been damaged in several places at once, so that Ellen could not have inflicted further injuries on herself. The resulting materials were passed to the police, but there, after reviewing them, again refused to initiate criminal proceedings. In 2018, the coroner gave an official conclusion, which stated that all 20 wounds the deceased had inflicted on herself, and there can be no doubt about it. New investigation. Once again, at a stalemate of justice, the grief-stricken parents hired a new attorney with whom they recollected all the documents, previously unrecorded evidence, facts, and witness statements. In 2019, they filed a new lawsuit against the coroner and experts who had improperly done their jobs and effectively collapsed the case. The following spring, the lawsuit was heard and settled, but trials never began due to the pandemic raging around the world. It was expected that the case would be reclassified, but due to the negligence of the police and medical examiners, as well as the resulting confusion, crucial evidence was lost and irretrievably lost. The parents of the dead girl even created a page in the social network dedicated to the progress of the investigation, where they share official materials, new details, and versions. Family, friends, and colleagues of Ellen insist that she could not take her own life, and even do it in such a heinous way. Ellen, in principle, did not tolerate the sight of blood. It made her sick, and she also had a low pain threshold, because of which she has never done tattoos or piercings. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed again, but the Greenbergs got it transferred to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over. The investigation began again, 11 years after those terrible events, but to this day the investigation has never been finalized. How did Sam's fate turn out? For the first year after the tragedy, Samuel tried to keep in touch with his estranged father-in-law and mother-in-law. However, he did not take any part in the investigations initiated by them. He flatly refused to communicate with the police, and it seemed that he was not interested in the case. He himself adhered to the official version that his fiancée himself inflicted fatal injuries. Goldberg soon found solace with another girl, and just a year later married her. Together with his wife, he moved to another state and stopped contact with the Greenberg family. Now he and his wife are raising 2 children together, and about the dead ex-fiancée, Sam tries not to remember. What do you guys think? Is Sam responsible for Ellen's death? Thanksgiving is a traditional family holiday. During this time, multiple generations gather around a festive table in the home of the elders. Each person present is expected to express gratitude for the blessings of the past year and to show love and respect for their relatives. This is how it goes for most families. However, there are those who disregard these established customs. In such relationships, things often leave much to be desired, and even significant dates hold little meaning. For domestic violence, there are no restraining factors. The boundaries of what is acceptable have long been broken. This is a new story about the horrific events that took place in one American family on the eve of a national holiday. Call for help. On November 23, 2006, at 3:46 p.m., a call was made to the Memphis, Tennessee Emergency Services. It's understood that misfortunes don't take holidays or weekends, so it can't be said that the atmosphere at 911 was relaxed. However, the dispatcher who took the call was in shock, as he later admitted to a colleague. What startled the operator was the absolute calmness of the caller, as if he wasn't asking for help but placing a breakfast order. The man identified himself as Jeffrey Scott and reported that his wife had been unconscious since 11 a.m. At the same time, a voice in the background corrected him, saying that the woman was most likely dead. When the dispatcher asked for clarification, Scott stated, "She was breathing a second ago and now she's dead." His voice didn't waver. Information about a possible crime was immediately relayed to the rescue service leadership, and a specialized team was dispatched to the scene. The victim. Law enforcement arrived at the address within minutes. They were met by the homeowner, who led them to the bedroom where his wife, Ashley Scott, lay. Upon entering the room, they saw someone bending over her, performing CPR. The man introduced himself as Dr. Robert McGee, a friend of Jeffrey. He said the woman was still alive, but on the brink of death. Her pulse was barely detectable, and her blood pressure was dangerously low. Medics examined the woman and agreed with his assessment. They suspected that she had sustained a head injury from a blunt object and was close to death. Her pupils were dilated and unresponsive to light, and blood was coming from her mouth and nose. Additionally, Ashley's body showed signs of trauma. Her legs, chest, and back bore numerous bruises and abrasions. The medical team attempted emergency resuscitation. They intubated her, used a defibrillator, and administered heart-stimulating drugs, but none of it helped. The young woman was dying before their eyes. In the end, she was rushed to the hospital. A neurosurgeon was called to assess her condition in the emergency department. His diagnosis was grim and confirmed his colleagues' opinions. The 28-year-old woman was in a critical state, at the final stage of brain death.
There was nothing that could be done to help her. Her body systems and vital organs were shutting down. As a result, it was decided not to prolong the patient's suffering and to disconnect her from life support. She passed away shortly after. There was no doubt that Ashley had been brutally deprived of life. Her right ear was green, a color typical of those who box and take repeated blows to the same spot. Additionally, a man's shoe print was visible on her back. It seemed as though someone had trampled, if not jumped, on her. Her fragile body was covered in bruises at various stages of healing, indicating that she had been subjected to periodic violence. Family doctor. While doctors fought for the life of a young and beautiful woman, police officers were questioning McGee and Scott. The doctor explained that he was the one who insisted on calling emergency services and shared what he knew. At 2:30 p.m., Jeffrey, his friend, called him. The men had met during their college years and occasionally kept in touch. Over the phone, Jeffrey mentioned that he had been drinking with his wife the night before, and afterward she felt unwell. She went to bed, but never woke up. He then decided to seek professional help. At the time, the doctor was busy but postponed his duties and arrived at the couple's home. There, he found Jeffrey next to his wife, who showed no signs of life. The doctor suspected that the couple had quarreled and something unfortunate had occurred, which they wanted to keep quiet about. That's why they contacted him. He knew that the couple had been going through tough times recently. Each reacted differently. Ashley drank, and Jeffrey was quick to anger and often raised his hand against her. When the doctor examined Ashley, he realized that the situation was far more severe than he had initially thought. There was no chance of survival, and the poor woman needed immediate medical attention. He insisted that Jeffrey call 911. At the same time, Robert pieced together the situation in his mind. He understood that something much more serious had happened, possibly a premeditated crime. He admitted to the police that he had deliberately delayed Scott at the scene to prevent him from fleeing. Jeffrey's lies. Throughout this, Jeffrey remained utterly emotionless. It seemed as though he had no concern for the future of the woman he once loved. When asked by the police what had happened, he explained that the previous evening they had argued. The reason was the discovery of Ashley's messages with another man. He believed his wife was cheating on him. Unable to bear the betrayal, he struck her, but only once. After that, she stumbled and fell, as she was heavily intoxicated. Jeffrey noted that his wife frequently abused alcohol and behaved irrationally. He didn't want to tolerate her outbursts anymore and kicked her out of the house. In such instances, she would usually sleep in the garage. In the morning, he found his wife there, still asleep. Feeling pity, Jeffrey carried her into the house and laid her on the bed. Time passed, but she didn't wake up. That's when he realized something was wrong and tried to revive her himself. Then he contacted his doctor friend and called him to the house. However, the police didn't believe his story. When they arrived, the woman was covered in bruises from head to toe. She was bleeding, with her face and head battered. Even if she had been drunk and fallen, she wouldn't have caused such injuries to herself. It was clear she had been beaten. Scott was arrested and charged with aggravated assault. As soon as the autopsy results came in, the charge was upgraded to first-degree crime. Autopsy results. The pathologist's report was chilling. The cause of Ashley Scott's death was a subdural hematoma on the right side of her brain. Such injuries are caused by a severe blow to the head. Her brain essentially slammed against her skull, leading to massive bleeding and swelling, cutting off the oxygen supply. This caused her body systems and organs to begin failing. It's an excruciating process. What's even more tragic is that she could have been saved if help had been provided in time, preferably within the first few hours. Additionally, more than 50 hematomas were found on her body. They varied in color and density, confirming the medic's statements that the woman had been repeatedly assaulted. It was hard to imagine the torment Ashley had endured over time. The most horrifying aspect was that the person who inflicted this suffering was the one who was supposed to protect her. Evidence. After Jeffrey's arrest, detectives began examining the crime scene.
Signs of a struggle were found throughout the house. Items were scattered everywhere, and furniture was overturned. A broken vase lay in the living room. On the kitchen table, near a laptop, were printed messages between Ashley and her lover, confirming the suspect's claims about the motive for the crime. Upon closer inspection of the garage, officers found bloodstains on the floor. Inside Mrs. Scott's car were women's clothes and other personal items. There was also a handbag containing her documents and passport. It appeared that the deceased had planned to escape, but she didn't make it. Officers then decided to speak with the family's relatives and friends, which revealed unexpected details about their lives and circumstances, shedding light on the incident. Unfortunately, it happens that women fall in love with the wrong men and tie their lives to them. Initially, everything seems bright and promising, but soon the object of their affection turns into a dreadful tyrant, and life with them becomes a nightmare. The victim of both emotional and physical abuse loses their sense of reality and may even justify the abuser's actions. In these cases, outside psychological help is needed, as the victim is often unable to help themselves or escape the situation. The kind soul of Ashley Pittman. Ashley Scott, née Pittman, was born on November 4, 1978, in Bossier City, Louisiana. Her parents separated while she was still in her mother's womb. However, fate smiled upon Donna, and she met Jimmy Pittman, whom she later married. Jimmy adopted Ashley and loved her from the moment she was born. Notably, Jimmy already had a 5-year-old daughter named Kika. Unfortunately, Jimmy and Donna's marriage didn't last long, and they divorced a few years later. It's important to note that Donna left the family herself and eventually remarried. Ashley chose to stay with her father but continued to see her mother. Despite her parents' divorce, Ashley had a good childhood. She grew up kind and obedient. Everyone around her considered her a true beauty and predicted a bright future for her. In 1996, she graduated from high school and then enrolled at Ouachita Baptist University in Arkansas. It was there that she met her first love. Jeffrey Scott had attended the same school as her and, by a stroke of fate, enrolled at the same university. Jeffrey also noticed the beautiful girl with a radiant smile, and before long, they started dating. The young couple seemed perfect, always together and holding hands. Ashley's friends envied her, believing she had found a reliable partner. Ashley fueled their curiosity by sharing how sweet and kind he was and how lucky she felt to have him. In 2000, Pittman received her long-awaited degree in education. Now, her childhood dream was about to come true. She wanted to become a teacher and dedicate her life to children. Unhappy celebrations. Finally, on June 9, 2001, Ashley and Jeffrey got married. However, things didn't go as they had appeared in her girlhood dreams. Unexpectedly for everyone, a dark side of her chosen one came to light. To be more precise, it became noticeable to others, although the bride herself had known about it but chose to ignore it. A year before the wedding, Ashley sent a letter to her sister, Keika, stating that she could no longer communicate with them, but they should respect her decision. Naturally, her family wasn't invited to the wedding either. Friends of Ashley, who had the fortune to attend the ceremony, were shocked. The overwhelming majority of guests were from the groom's side, while Ashley had a large, close-knit family. This struck them as odd. However, they later understood why. The reason was that her family did not share her views on Jeffrey, and he made no effort to change their minds. Behind the seemingly nice guy lurked something sinister. He frequently spoke ill of her family and behaved inappropriately. He offended those close to her and felt justified in doing so. What was most surprising was her reaction. It was as if Ashley was making excuses for him. During the wedding, Jeffrey once again insulted some of her friends and acted arrogantly. Eventually, when the newlyweds moved to Cordova, a suburb of Memphis, Tennessee, her relationships with many people deteriorated. Those who didn't turn away from her continued to stay in touch, but kept their distance. The dark side of Jeffrey Scott. After the move, the head of the family started working as a computer systems technician at his father's company,
while the newly minted Mrs. Scott became an English teacher at a middle school. Everyone spoke highly of her. Ashley was considered beautiful and cheerful, intelligent and sociable. She loved her job and her students. Later, Paul Dooley described his colleague as a skilled specialist and talented educator. She was the main reason to get up in the morning and go to English class, he shared. In court, he admitted that the school was the only place where she felt safe and loved. The educational institution became a refuge where Jeffrey Scott couldn't reach her. Indeed, as time passed, the relationship between the spouses worsened. Ashley's connection with her family nearly broke. She didn't want to discuss it and called the situation her personal choice. Without a doubt, these conclusions were made under the influence of a master manipulator. Her husband was precisely that. In the early years, he completely dominated her and cut her off from outside support. Daily criticisms for every little thing lowered her self-esteem. Scott suppressed his wife in any way he could. During this period, she communicated with only a few people. Among them was her childhood friend, Lori. The girls had been friends since 5th grade and maintained contact into adulthood. Reunion evening. In September 2006, a high school reunion was planned for the school where Ashley studied. She was eager to attend, and despite her husband's reluctance, she went to the event. Those present didn't notice any significant changes in her. However, Lori was concerned. Throughout the evening, Jeffrey constantly called his wife, not allowing her to relax and enjoy herself. He asked whom she was talking to, what she was wearing, what she was eating and drinking, and what she was discussing. In short, he tried to control every minute of her life. That evening, Ashley confessed to Lori the nightmare she was living in and said she couldn't go on like this. She revealed that she was considering divorce and had even contacted a divorce attorney. She also admitted that she knew about her husband's repeated infidelities. She mentioned, for example, an affair with a colleague named Blair Brown, with whom she had once gotten along well. However, she noted that over time, she forgave her acquaintance. Blair had reached out to her to share who Jeffrey really was and how dangerous he could be. It should be noted that this party was the last in the young woman's life. After that, she didn't speak to anyone for several weeks, and new bruises appeared on her body. Lori's testimony. Detectives became interested in the stories shared by Ashley's relatives and friends. Through conversations with them, they gathered a lot of valuable information. Lori also revealed that shortly before Ashley's death, Jeffrey had called her several times to complain about his wife. He claimed that she drank heavily, lost her balance, and often fell, which explained why she was covered in bruises. However, the next morning, Ashley wouldn't remember these events and would blame him. He attributed her growing alcohol dependency to their mutual acquaintance, Blair, claiming that she had corrupted Ashley and turned her against him. He also mentioned that he no longer wanted to have children because he felt disgusted with his wife after everything that had happened. Scott accused his wife of constant infidelity, lying, and alcoholism. However, Lori didn't believe any of this and thought he was trying to justify himself. Eventually, Lori realized that Ashley had become a victim of domestic violence and was in serious trouble. After each of these calls, she would try to call her friend back, but Ashley wouldn't pick up, which was very strange. The last time they saw each other was shortly before the tragic events. The friends went shopping, but Ashley didn't buy anything for herself. She was sad and pensive. Lori tried to talk to her about her marriage, but Ashley said she didn't want to ruin the evening and changed the subject. The only thing she mentioned about the impending divorce was that she was ready to take that step but was very afraid. She knew Jeffrey well and feared his reaction could be completely unpredictable. Blair's testimony. Next, Blair Brown, whose name frequently came up in the Scott family, was called in for questioning. She admitted that she had indeed been Jeffrey's lover in the past. Therefore, she knew firsthand about his uncontrollable fits of rage. It was established that the friendship between the two women was rekindled about 6 months before the crime. Blair felt sympathy for her and provided occasional support.
She also admitted that her relationship with Jeffrey was a mistake and apologized repeatedly for it. The women sometimes met and had drinks together. Ashley would often hide at Blair's place to get away from Jeffrey. One day, he tracked her down and came for her. At that moment, Blair witnessed a brutal attack. Scott struck his wife several times in the face and threw her out onto the street, completely unfazed by the presence of a witness. Even after these events, Ashley downplayed his guilt and made excuses for him. The accused. During another interrogation, Scott admitted that he contacted Robert McGee only 12 to 15 hours after the argument. All that time, his wife had been unconscious, alone in the garage. Jeffrey continued to insist that he had only struck her once because of the discovered infidelity. After that, he sent her to the garage, brought bedding, and threw it on the floor. The bleeding woman was left to spend her last hours freezing and suffering in pain, while her husband rested comfortably in the house. However, the autopsy results did not support his claims. It was clear that he had always treated his wife poorly. Additionally, detectives learned that Jeffrey occasionally used the services of escorts, even when Ashley was at the reunion. Despite this, he blamed her for all their problems. Indeed, shortly before she decided to file for divorce, Ashley met a young man named Michael Lowe. They exchanged messages from October 29th to November 22nd, 2006. He was the one who encouraged her to leave her husband, assuring her that he would support her and had everything ready for her departure. Michael told her that he loved her and wanted to show her a different life. When Jeffrey read their messages, he was enraged and decided to teach his unfaithful wife a lesson. The trial and the advocate. The trial of Jeffrey Scott began on January 13, 2009. The prosecution argued that it was a premeditated crime. It was evident that the argument between the spouses started in the living room, where a vase was found broken. They then moved through the house, with Ashley enduring violence in nearly every room. Bloodstains were found in almost every room. The divorce attorney Ashley had consulted testified for the prosecution. She explained that she had met with Ashley the day before her death. At that point, all the documents for the divorce were ready. All her client had to do was pack her things and leave the house while her husband was at work. Rachel advised that Ashley should leave secretly. This explains the items and documents found in her car. However, Ashley didn't follow the expert's advice. She didn't want to leave without explaining to her husband, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. The advocate tried her best to help Ashley and even provided her services for a symbolic fee. The attorney also mentioned that she knew her client had been drinking and had quit her beloved job because of it. She did this to numb the emotions she felt in her marriage and needed support. For a long time, the women communicated in secret. This was done to ensure Ashley's departure was as safe as possible. Since her husband controlled all calls, they met on neutral ground or communicated via payphone. Many witnesses confirmed that they had seen scratches or bruises on Ashley, which she carefully concealed under layers of makeup. Some knew the real cause of the injuries but felt powerless to help. In their final report, the medical examiners noted that Ashley had frequently been kicked. It seems Jeffrey would knock her to the ground and then stomp on her. Old bruises from shoes were found on her back and legs. The devil's advocate. The defense team for the accused worked tirelessly to reduce the charge to second-degree crime. The attorney painted the victim in an unflattering light, portraying her as an alcoholic and unstable hysteric. In short, they did everything possible to make the jury believe that Scott also suffered in the marriage. The defense discredited the victim, who couldn't defend herself because she was no longer alive. It was revealed that in 2005, Ashley had been fined for drunk driving. Meanwhile, Jeffrey claimed he wanted to repair the marriage, bought a new home, and was open to having children, all for a woman who had a lover and exchanged intimate photos with him. Regarding the crime itself, he claimed he lost control, realizing his efforts were futile and that Ashley had found someone else. "I regret the pain I caused you, he addressed his wife's family, "but I mourn her loss and pray for her soul." In contrast, during the trial, it was noted that after his arrest, Scott didn't ask about his wife's condition. Instead, he inquired about the outcome of a recent football game. His attorney played dirty. During his statement, he even claimed that the victim sustained most of her injuries during a seizure caused by alcohol withdrawal. An independent expert was found to back up this claim. To refute this, the assistant county medical examiner was called to testify. He read the autopsy results, listed all the injuries on the body, and most importantly, stated the cause of death, which could not have resulted from accidental falls. Prosecutor's argument. The prosecutor argued that the defense's version of an unintentional crime was absurd. It was clear that the victim wanted to escape her tormentor, but, out of affection for her husband, hoped to end things amicably. Meanwhile, the accused showed her the printout of her messages with Michael and attacked her. As he struck her repeatedly, he knew he was causing unbearable pain and suffering. He then finished her off in the garage, where she lost consciousness. Scott saw the severity of her injuries but ignored them and didn't seek medical help. The criminal chose to wait and only then called a doctor. The prosecutor insisted that the accused wanted his wife dead. However, a surprising fact came to light. Investigators found evidence that Ashley had wanted to save the marriage. It was discovered that she had been taking special medication to get pregnant and had supported the purchase of a new home. Perhaps she was so dependent on the toxic relationship that she couldn't imagine life without Jeffrey. However, she eventually decided to leave. It's possible she didn't want to leave secretly, hoping to hear from her husband that he would change and everything would be fine. Victims of abuse often cling to such illusory hopes. Guilty verdict. On January 19, 2009, Jeffrey Scott was found guilty of second-degree crime. Even the judge was dissatisfied with the jury's verdict, criticizing the jurors because the vote in favor of the original charge was 12-1. There was one person who didn't believe the accused was guilty enough. According to state law, a unanimous decision is required to convict someone of first-degree crime. The victim's family was also disheartened. The accused will spend 25 years behind bars without the possibility of parole. Conclusion. Perhaps this punishment isn't enough for someone who tormented a woman for years. The tyrant isolated her from everyone, brainwashed her, and made her think that she and her family weren't good enough to be part of his life. Nevertheless, Ashley's father said, "This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. I loved that little girl. If she had died a natural death, I would have come to terms with it over time. But knowing how cruelly my daughter died and who was responsible, I will never be able to accept it." The story of Ashley Scott's life teaches us many things, but most importantly, no matter what happens, we should never isolate ourselves from our loved ones. Sometimes, they are the only ones who truly care about us and can help us. The dark secrets of a rich and happy family. It's often said that great wealth can corrupt even the best of people, but in reality, that's not entirely accurate. Wealth simply amplifies the existing negative qualities in a person, providing a sense of impunity and permissiveness. While the absence of money is certainly not pleasant, it's important to remember that banknotes, jewels, and figures on bank accounts, by themselves, cannot bring happiness, especially if they were obtained through dishonest means or at the expense of someone else's life. The case of Suretta and Leon Brits in 2020 shook not just South Africa, where this dramatic story unfolded, but also the entire world. The investigation promised to be challenging, with an innocent individual initially becoming the main suspect. It wasn't until an unexpected and heartfelt confession emerged that the true perpetrator, who had the least malice towards the victim, was identified. Now, let's delve into the complicated scheme from the beginning, where money became a stumbling block in what many considered to be a large, harmonious family. The Brits family. The Brits, a family of European immigrants, settled in the early 1970s in the small but cozy town of Pofadder, located in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. Despite its modest size, This town is an important economic and tourist hub in the region known as Bushmanland. It's also worth noting that the surrounding landscapes are incredibly picturesque, attracting biologists and researchers with their diverse flora and fauna. In 1976, the Brits had their first son, whom they named Toki, and in 1979, their second son, Leon, was born. Even by local standards, the family was considered quite affluent. The family patriarch owned what was arguably the only major hotel in the area, which eventually grew into a comprehensive hotel and restaurant complex. Both brothers excelled in school, were active in sports, and thanks to their parents' efforts, received prestigious educations. After completing his studies, Toki left his hometown, while Leon, who had been helping his parents and learning the intricacies of the hotel business from his teenage years, decided to stay to eventually take over the reins of management. He was intelligent, attentive to detail, and possessed a so-called entrepreneurial vein, enabling him to manage affairs effectively. The story of Cinderella. At the hotel complex owned by the Brits family, various events, parties, and celebrations were often held. At one such event, Leon noticed a young beauty among the guests. A slender brunette with green eyes and a captivating smile caught his eye immediately. The young man decided to approach her and introduce himself, only to find out that she was just 14 years old and she was in school, though she appeared much older. This fact deeply unsettled Leon, who was already 25 at the time, but he still decided to invite the beauty for a dance, and afterward, they spent about an hour chatting while sitting on the terrace. The schoolgirl's name was Suretta, and from that very first meeting, Brits couldn't stop thinking about her, constantly dreaming of their next encounter. But let's delve a bit into who this enchanting young stranger was. Suretta Core was born on September 6, 1990, the youngest of 3 children in a family of immigrants from Eastern Europe. Her family lived in poverty, and her parents had been teetering on the brink of divorce for many years, exacerbating the already difficult situation. When the youngest daughter was only 9 years old, the head of the family tragically died from a venomous snake bite, leaving the mother alone with 3 children, barely making ends meet. All the Core children had to work to survive, making Suretta's childhood a difficult period filled with hardships and deprivation. But then, a wealthy suitor suddenly appeared in her life, ready to lay the world at her feet. Due to her young age, the girl didn't understand how to react to the attention from an adult man who was 11 years older than her. Leon seemed genuinely in love. He sought any excuse to meet with the girl, picked her up after school, took her to popular restaurants, bought expensive gifts, fashionable clothes, and tried to please her in every way possible. Suretta received things she had always been deprived of, and luxury literally went to the schoolgirl's head. She understood that with this man, she could build a family, and neither they nor their children would ever want for anything. The girl's mother, despite her daughter's young age, approved of the relationship. Leon seemed to her a reliable, decent, and kind person, and no one doubted the sincerity of his feelings. However, the young man's parents were very worried about his romance with her, as such relationships, if they went too far, could be considered a criminal offense. But the young man insisted he was willing to wait until his beloved turned 18, after which he would officially marry her. Unexpected pregnancy. About a year into their relationship, 15-year-old Suretta realized she was pregnant. She was hesitant to tell anyone, knowing that the news would not please either her mother or her lover. The girl began to wear baggy clothes to hide her changed figure and became withdrawn and uncommunicative, but she could no longer keep everything secret and decided to confess everything to her partner. The news of the impending addition was a shock to Leon. He understood that she could not only tarnish his reputation, but also lead to serious legal problems. The closeness between them had been initiated by him, and now he could be accused of seducing a teenager, which he couldn't allow. First, the man paid for a visit to a private clinic, where they not only confirmed the pregnancy, but also discovered that she was expecting twins. With the term approaching a critical point, Leon found a doctor at the same private clinic who agreed to terminate the pregnancy anonymously. Suretta was devastated and felt completely crushed, as her partner, who had promised to love and protect her, forcibly persuaded her to terminate their unborn children. However, Leon, being older, was able to pressure her and convince her of the necessity of the procedure. He promised that in the future, when they got married, they would definitely have children, but for now, it would simply destroy their lives and plans for a happy future together. The young woman had no choice but to comply, and she did as her boyfriend asked. She suffered from pain for several days after, but the physical discomfort was overshadowed by a sense of guilt and overwhelming depression. Suretta stayed in her room, cried constantly, and didn't know how to continue living with this. Her mother didn't show much interest in her condition, assuming her daughter was just upset over some argument with her boyfriend, but everything would pass once they reconciled. A couple of days later, Leon actually showed up at his beloved's doorstep and took her to the city to distract her, to walk in the park, and to browse through stores. He believed this would help her recover faster and lift her spirits. Sure enough, she soon managed to return to her previous life, but the feelings of resentment and distrust towards her partner lingered. Forced marriage. 3 years later, while the young woman was in her senior year of high school, she discovered she was pregnant again. At that time, she was only a few months away from becoming an adult, and this unexpected, delicate condition was not supposed to cause any particular issues. However, when she told Leon about it, he reacted very negatively again and insisted that his beloved terminate the pregnancy, arguing that they were too young to start a family. This time, Suretta firmly refused, stating that she would not do it and would keep the child, even if it meant raising it on her own. After some thought, Leon eventually made an official proposal, presenting her with a beautiful diamond ring. By then, their once tender feelings had considerably dulled, but this renewed promise and Suretta's ongoing pregnancy left him with no choice. By the time she graduated from high school, the changes in her figure were already obvious, and in the fall, as soon as she turned 18, the couple had a lavish wedding. The newlyweds appeared quite happy, but each had certain doubts about the correctness of their decision. A few months later, the couple had their first son, and 2 years after that, twin boys were born. The family lived in affluence, able to indulge in anything they wanted, and from the outside they looked successful, well-off, and happy. Family business. The business founded and developed over many years by Leon's parents was quite profitable. Over time, the man also started his own chain of stores and fast food eateries, and his ventures were on the rise, with the family business flourishing. However, from the mid-2010s, the family began to experience troubles and misfortunes. In 2014, Leon's father passed away suddenly due to long-standing heart issues, and his mother's health deteriorated from the shock of losing her husband. She soon showed rapidly progressing signs of dementia, forcing her sons to place her in a specialized clinic for necessary care and proper attention. Toki returned to his hometown after many years away to help his brother manage the business, and together they took over the operation of a hotel. At the same time, Leon decided to involve his wife in the family business, something she had long aspired to do. It was decided to register a mining equipment and tools store in her name. She dove into work while also continuing to raise their 3 young sons. Life between two cities. Brits, the eldest son, started elementary school in his hometown of Pofadder, but as the twins grew older, the parents faced the pressing issue of choosing a suitable educational institution for all their children. The challenge was that finding quality education in South Africa was not so straightforward. The spouses found a good school in the nearby city of Kakamas. The school was about 75 miles from Brits's home, but there was no need for daily travel back and forth. The couple decided to rent a spacious house in Kakamas, where Suretta moved with the sons, but Leon stayed in Pofadder as he could not leave the business and manage affairs remotely. However, the wife had to step back from managing the store, although she really enjoyed it and was quite successful at it. The woman dedicated herself entirely to raising the sons, and they only visited home to see their husband and father on weekends and holidays. Leon himself rarely came to Kakamas due to his busy schedule. Initially, it seemed that everything was in order, but over time, the spouses drifted further apart, and their feelings significantly cooled. Battle with a deadly illness. In 2018, Suretta started having health problems, which she did not take seriously at first. However, an examination revealed that the young woman had oncology and problems with the cardiovascular system. Soon, she underwent surgery to remove the malignant tumor and was prescribed a treatment course. Fortunately, all procedures were timely, saving the life of the mother of 3. But from then on, for prevention, she needed periodic therapy at a clinic in Johannesburg, which was quite expensive. The Brits family had the means, and Leon would never skimp on the health of his son's mother. Additionally, Suretta hired a nanny and a housekeeper who helped her around the house and looked after the children, which was essential when the woman went for treatment. By that time, the spouses had drifted so far apart that each essentially lived their own life. The young woman started an affair in Johannesburg, so when going for another course of preventive therapy, she would not stay in a hotel, but at her lover's place. Leon, apparently, also periodically had women, as compromising photos and messages found in his phone suggested. In fact, nothing but their 3 children bound the couple together anymore. Enemies and envy. The family issues did not affect the business, which continued to thrive. The hotel, stores, and restaurant chain were generating impressive profits, some of which Leon invested in real estate in major cities, earning a good income from rentals. Undoubtedly, their family was not only the wealthiest in Pofadder, but also among the most affluent in the northern Cape Province. Naturally, the Brits had many enviés and ill-wishers, whose numbers grew in proportion to the profitability of their business. Leon, his parents, and his brother regularly received threats and various demands. Leon himself often confided in his wife that he had long felt unsafe and feared that someone might try to take away his life's work. In each of Leon's offices, as well as at his and his parents' homes, there were safes and cleverly disguised hiding places storing cash in various currencies, securities, diamonds, jewelry, and gold bars. Suretta knew only about some of them, specifically those in their own home in Pofadder. Initially, the threats were a serious concern, but over time, as the man began receiving them daily, he simply stopped paying attention to them. He believed they were just attempts to intimidate him, as the ill-wishers had never tried to act on their threats. However, a tragedy soon occurred that ended Leon's life. Body in the pool. On October 7, 2020, Leon's wife called him and asked him to check on their dogs, which, according to a neighbor, had gotten out. Leon promised to call back as soon as he arrived and checked that everything was in order, but the return call never came. Concerned, Suretta called her husband's number several times, but no one answered. Leaving the children with the nanny, she drove to Pofadder. The front door was unlocked, but it seemed that no one was home. It was suspiciously quiet inside, and no one responded to her calls. She then went to the backyard, where she found her husband's body floating face down in the pool. There were wounds on his back, the water was tinged pink with blood, and it was clear that he was deceased. Panicking, Suretta called the police, the emergency services, and then dialed Toki, informing him of the incident. When law enforcement arrived, they immediately cordoned off the house as a crime scene. It was evident that the businessman's death was violent. The body had several stab wounds and signs of a struggle, and a safe in the house had been opened and its contents taken. An initial theory was that burglars had broken into the house, and the homeowner, returning unexpectedly, had caught them off guard, paying with his life. However, many other valuable items in plain sight remained untouched, suggesting the burglars had specifically targeted what was in the safe. Prime suspect. The murder of the successful and wealthy businessman quickly made a lot of noise, hotly discussed in the media and on social networks, generating numerous rumors, gossip, and speculations. Many knew about the long-standing threats against Brits and believed that competitors or ill-wishers had fulfilled their threats. However, the first and key suspect in the case became Toki, who had been managing the family business with his brother for the last few years. First, He had visited Leon shortly before the tragedy and was considered the last person to see him alive. Second, their mother was in very poor health, with doctors giving her only a few months to live, and her will, reportedly, was stored at the younger son's house. The prevailing theory was that the elder brother disagreed with the business mostly going to Leon and wanted to access the will to alter it. This explained why the other items in the house remained untouched. It was also suspected that he did not act alone, and murder was not part of the original plan. Toki categorically denied any involvement and stated that under no circumstances would he harm his own brother, especially since they had never had disputes or disagreements over financial matters. He sought support from Suretta, who asserted that she believed him and would help find the best lawyer to prove his innocence. Unexpected confession. For nearly 2 months, the investigation was at a standstill with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses emerging. However, one day, 35-year-old Jacques Van Vuren walked into the police station and offered to make a deal by pleading guilty and revealing all his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. It turned out that Jacques had once attended the same school as Suretta. They were friends, and he even had feelings for her, but she did not reciprocate and soon started a relationship with Leon. The former friends had not seen each other for many years, but one day they coincidentally met at a shopping center and started talking. At that time, Jacques was going through a tough period. He had divorced his wife, lost his job, developed a dependence on alcohol, and was in dire need of money. Suretta saw that her former admirer still harbored tender feelings for her, so she began to confide in him about her unhappy marriage. She claimed that her husband mistreated her, was abusive, but she could not leave him because he threatened to take their sons and leave her with nothing. This topic was painful for Van Vuren since his ex-wife had barred him from seeing their children after the divorce, and he genuinely empathized with Suretta and wanted to help. They exchanged phone numbers, and a few days later, Suretta, having devised a cunning plan, called her former friend and tearfully told him that her husband had beaten her. She said she couldn't leave him, and the only solution was to eliminate the tyrant. Suretta was very persuasive, and Jacques believed her. Moreover, she promised him 500,000 South African rand as payment, and he, as mentioned, was in desperate need of money. Jacques agreed to help Suretta, but he did not want to do the dirty work himself, so he decided to hire other people. The plan was developed in early 2020, but due to the global epidemic that swept the world, its execution had to be delayed. During this difficult time, the Brits family business suffered colossal losses. A store and part of the restaurants had to be closed, and Leon wanted to sell the hotel, which his wife did not agree with. In late September, the conspirators returned to the original plan, but Jacques requested half of the payment up front. However, due to financial difficulties, Suretta could only withdraw 100,000 rand and also gave her accomplice her engagement ring. With this money, Jacques hired a friend named Enrique Williams, who had drug issues and was willing to commit murder for money. However, Williams was afraid he couldn't handle a grown, strong man alone, so he brought along his 25-year-old friend, Amantla Bareki, to share the fee. Suretta gave the criminals access to the house, informed them about the safe's location, and allowed them to take whatever they liked to make the robbery look more plausible. The only condition was that the dogs should not be harmed, so she let them out in advance. The neighbors saw this and called her, signaling that Williams and Bareki were in the house, after which she called her husband and lured him into a deadly trap. When the unsuspecting man entered the house, he was struck on the head with a baseball bat by one of the lurking criminals, and another attacked him with a knife, leaving him no chance. Leon was stabbed 8 times and hit with the bat a dozen times before his lifeless body was thrown into the pool. After opening the safe, the criminals found no money, only securities, diamonds, and gold bars. They handed over the loot to Jacques, who, in turn, gave everything to Suretta. The criminals decided not to take anything else from the house, fearing they would leave too many traces. They were only counting on the large sum promised by the client. Torment of conscience and fear of inevitable punishment. Jacques was not supposed to appear at the crime scene himself. Suretta feared he would be caught on surveillance camera footage and recognized, as Toki had seen him a couple of times and knew he was his brother's wife's school friend. He was only supposed to pass on the advance payment and instructions to the accomplices. However, Jacques was anxious to ensure everything went smoothly and drove past the Brits' house several times to make sure the perpetrators were in place and the victim had arrived directly to them. His car was captured on camera, and although the license plate was not clearly visible, the police were interested in the vehicle, meaning that finding its owner was only a matter of time. Furthermore, there was no money in the safe, and all the family's accounts were frozen during the investigation. Suretta had no way to pay the hired perpetrators, as selling diamonds, bars, or securities would expose her. She asked them to wait, but Williams and Bareki were not willing to wait and began to threaten Jacques. Desperate, Jacques had not received the money, was plagued by guilt, and his accomplices threatened to deal with him. He realized that he would end up either behind bars or follow Leon. Jacques shared his concerns with his sister, who told their mother, and together the women convinced him to voluntarily surrender to the police and reveal the other participants in the plot to secure a more lenient punishment. True motives of the mastermind. Jacques, in his full account to the police, believed he had done a noble act, as he saw Leon as a man who mistreated his wife, was abusive, and threatened to take away the children. However, it was actually Suretta who initially directed the police to consider Toki as the main suspect. Citing a will and property disputes between the brothers, the authorities decided to detain and interrogate the woman to uncover her true motives. It turned out that she and her husband had fallen out of love long ago, and each was living a separate life. Suretta had a lover in Johannesburg, whom she wanted to join permanently. However, when she expressed her desire to divorce, Leon categorically refused to agree. He also threatened to leave her with nothing and take the sons if she decided to leave him. It's hard to say what motivated Leon, but it's likely he still had feelings for his beautiful wife and hoped to mend their relationship. Suretta, however, decided that she would inherit his money and business upon his death, which would allow her and her lover to live comfortably. She also saw an opportunity to rid herself of Toki by framing him, thus becoming the sole owner of the hotel, stores, and restaurants after her mother-in-law's death. Her plan might have succeeded if there had been money in the safe and she had managed to pay off the hired perpetrators. Trial and sentencing of all participants. The trial of the criminal quartet took place in the spring of 2021. Each participant's role in this high-profile case was considered. Jacques Van Vuren, who made a deal with the prosecution, told everything in detail and turned in his accomplices, was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The hired perpetrators, Enrique Williams and Amantal Bareki, were found guilty of premeditated murder with special cruelty and robbery. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As for the widow who orchestrated the murder of her own husband, she managed to convince the court that she had been a victim from the very beginning of their relationship. She testified that Leon coerced her into intimacy when she was just 14 years old, and a year later, when she became pregnant, Brits, to avoid responsibility, forced her to terminate the pregnancy at a fairly late stage. In recent years, despite the disappearance of love, he refused to divorce her and threatened to take the children. Nevertheless, Suretta Brits was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole from the beginning of her term. The court considered her remorse and heartfelt confession, as well as her status as the mother of 3 minor children. However, 3 years after the sentence was passed, she remains incarcerated. Many years ago, scientists believed that religion would soon disappear and people would live in a benign, rational world. But religion has not disappeared. Moreover, the majority of the world's population remains religious to this day. Kurds are an Indo-European ethnic group, the 4th largest nation in the Middle East, and the largest nation in the region without a state of its own. The vast majority of Kurds are Muslims. Religion sets a person certain rules of behavior, makes them sacred, so people are afraid to break them. But today, we will learn the story of one family,
where the rules of religion were distorted in favor of their own immoral beliefs. On January 26, 2006, a young man, Rahmat Suleimani, went to the police station and reported his beloved girlfriend Banaz missing. The man became concerned about her welfare after he had been unable to contact her for a week. The police did not take the missing report seriously as the man had no family ties with the missing woman, but they were forced to check the information and go to the address of residence. When the police visited the missing woman's home, they found nothing to confirm Rahmat's words about the disappearance. Her parents behaved calmly and did not express any obvious concern as if their daughter was really missing. Moreover, the family claimed that Banaz had not been home much lately and insisted that she was not missing, but had probably left and was probably at a friend's house. The police were satisfied with this explanation, but Rahmat persisted, harassing the police with daily visits to the station and forcing them to take search measures. He would not give up. The man was desperately searching for his beloved Banaz. Banaz Mahmod was born on December 16, 1985, in Iraq. They were a traditional Iraqi Kurdish family with strict religious beliefs. They lived in the rural tribal area of Kaladiza in Iraqi Kurdistan. Mahmoud Babakir Mahmud and his wife Beya had a son Bahman and 5 daughters, Beza, Behal, Hayman, Jaband, and Banaz. It was a typical Iraqi family with strong views on the role of women. In 1995, when Banaz was 10 years old, her family fled to the UK. The move had no impact on the family's views. Remaining deeply religious and traditionally influenced, the Mahmouds Sr. were not about to change their way of life even in a liberated European country. They shunned modern notions and views and lived in their religious community. Following the traditions of the community, at the age of 17, Banaz was forcibly married to a man who was 10 years older. He had flown in from Iraq shortly before the wedding, spoke no English at all, and lacked even basic literacy. She had met her future husband only 3 times before the wedding, once on her father's property. A girl with brown eyes, long dark hair, and a kind smile, she submitted to tradition and moved into the home of a strange, alien, and cruel man. From the first days Banaz crossed the threshold of her new home, her husband set about raising her. Moral abuse, beatings, and physical violence became a daily occurrence in the girl's life. Banaz, who had lived half her life in the UK and had seen how modern people live, did not want to put up with cruelty and tyranny in her family. She made attempts to leave her husband many times, returning to her father's house, but her family forced her to return. Despite the disgusting attitude, divorce was out of the question, as it was considered a disgrace for the entire Mahmod family. Unable to find support from her relatives, Banaz went to the police twice, but even there, she was virtually abandoned to the mercy of fate, without even bothering to question her husband about his wife's injuries. In July 2005, after 2 agonizing years of marriage, Banaz ran away from her tyrant husband's house and returned to her parents' home. This was the first link in the chain of events that led to Banaz Mahmod's disappearance. After her separation from her husband, Banaz felt as if she was breathing again. She met a man named Rahmat Suleimani. The bright, pretty 19-year-old girl fell in love with the man. Rahmat was charmed by Banaz's beauty and modesty. They liked each other very much, but had to keep the beginning of their relationship a secret. Having exchanged telephone numbers, the lovers allowed themselves to correspond only twice a day, early in the morning and late in the evening. Rahmat was different from the men in Banaz's entourage. Calm, judicious, and polite, Rahmat treated the girl very reverently and tenderly and won her heart at once. Within a short time, the couple was already dreaming of a wedding and a happy family life. They even came up with names for their future children. These fantasies filled Banaz with happiness and kept her afloat, not allowing her to break under the pressure of hatred and aggression, which was spewed at her by her family, who never accepted the departure of her husband. In early October 2005, while walking down the street, Banaz noticed the same car following her and someone following her. From their appearance, She realized that they were Kurdish diaspora people assigned by her father. The girl, who knew the foundations of her family, became very scared for her safety. On October 10, 2005, Banaz went to the police again. During a 2-hour interview, she told the detective on duty in detail about her life with her husband, the injuries she had received from him, her family's resentment, and the surveillance that had begun. She shared with local police that she had been repeatedly beaten by her tyrant husband, and during one of the assaults, she nearly had a tooth knocked out because she publicly called her husband by his first name. She brought to the attention of the police several times that she seriously feared for her safety and even her life. But unfortunately, Banaz's statement went into the back of the desk, and detectives didn't even bother to interview her family and husband and verify the accuracy of the information. Again, Banaz's statement is not taken properly. She promises to contact the police again if she feels she is in danger. For about 2 months, Banaz and Rahmat met secretly and went undetected. But in early December 2005, when they met near a London subway station, they were spotted by people from the clan. Information about another disgrace was immediately reported to the girl's father. That same evening, a council consisting of all male relatives gathered at the Mahmod family home. During a heated discussion of Banaz's actions, which they considered inappropriate, her uncle Ari Mahmod announced that to restore the family's honor, Banaz should be killed. She overheard this conversation. In December 2005, Banaz went to the police again and detailed that she had been under surveillance for months and that the day before she had learned that they wanted to take her life. She made a list of 5 members of her own family who were to carry out the massacre, but the law enforcers again did not take her words seriously. Soon it turns out that it was a big mistake, the consequence of which will be the disappearance of Banaz. And to learn about her fate, detectives will have to wade through a web of lies, cruelty, and ignorance. 2 weeks later, Banaz's father tricks her into going to a relative's house, promising to discuss her divorce. When she arrived, Bubakir Mahmod made her drink brandy and left her alone in a room with the TV on. Casually turning around, she sees her father putting on rubber gloves and reaching for a rope. Realizing that she was about to be taken out of her life, Banaz rushed to the front door, but the door was locked. In order to get out, she had to break a window, the shards of which cut her hands. The girl managed to get to a nearby cafe where she fainted. The paramedics who arrived at the scene took her to the hospital where they called the police. When Banaz regained consciousness, she called Rahmat and asked him to come. After being discharged from the hospital, Banaz went to live with Rahmat Suleimani. They welcomed the beginning of 2006 together and were quite happy. But by mid-January, the Mahmod family furiously began urging Banaz to return home to mend their relationship with her and discuss her marriage to Rahmat. Banaz believed her mom and dad and agreed to go back to her father's house. She believed that in case her father attacked her, her mother would protect her from harm. As insurance, Banaz visited the police station again, writing a full statement and the names of people who might harm her. The young woman was fearful, but still returned to her family and parents' home. On January 22, 2006, in the street, 3 men attempted to grab Rahmat and force him into a car. Suleimani was able to fight back and report the incident to the police. 2 days later, he and Banaz were to appear at the station to testify, but Banaz never showed up. All attempts by Rahmat to contact her were unsuccessful, as Banaz Mahmod disappeared after returning to her parents' house. Rahmat, who had been in constant contact with her, was very worried and filed a missing persons report with the police. Numerous appeals to the police eventually bore fruit. The case of Banaz Mahmod's disappearance came to the attention of the Homicide and Serious Crime Directorate, and Chief Inspector Caroline Good was appointed to lead the investigation. The first version of the disappearance was that Banaz was being held in a house in the diaspora. To search for the woman, Inspector Caroline Good organized a large-scale search of properties associated with the Mahmod family. The suspects, Banaz's father and uncle, as well as her ex-husband, were called in for questioning. Searches have begun for 3 other men on the list Banaz provided to police in December 2005: Omar Hussein, Muhammad Ali, and Mohammed Ham. All of them were Banaz's cousins. When police searched the forest and tried to question her family, doors were slammed in their faces and the family was unable to help investigate her disappearance. Police found no pictures of her at the family home, and according to Caroline Good, officers were outraged by the complete indifference from her family. Then 30 people came to the attention of Caroline Good. All of them were arrested and interrogated. During searches from the persons involved in the case, were seized more than 20 vehicles and 300 cell phones. Absolutely all those questioned tried in one way or another to slow down the investigation, giving completely contradictory testimony about Banaz's whereabouts. Some lied about seeing her after her disappearance. Others, including Banaz's mother, simply refused to talk to the police, and some claimed she was a fugitive. Realizing that none of them would cooperate voluntarily, Caroline Good obtained permission to install listening devices in the cell of those arrested. At the time, Banaz's father and uncle, as well as Mohammed Hama, remained behind bars. The other 2 men on the list managed to flee to Iraq. When the detectives received the first results of the wiretap, they were horrified. Not only did all 3 arrested men have no regrets, they literally savored the details of Banaz's death. From their conversations, it became clear that in the early morning hours of January 23rd, the Mahmod family deliberately left their home, letting Ali, Hussein, and Hama inside. There they attacked Banaz and subjected her to beatings and violence for 2 hours. At the end of the torture, Hama tightened a cord around her neck and strangled her. As he recounted the last moments of Banaz's life, Hama could not contain his laughter. But it was the accusation of her cousin, Mohammed Hama, after he admitted to being there when Ramat was threatened, that became the turning point. While Hama was held in cells awaiting trial, his phone conversations were secretly recorded. Caroline Good, with a new dose of horror, listened to the recordings, in which the suspect proudly described the details of the massacre of a relative. They congratulated each other on how courageous they were. Hama shared in detail what they had done to Banaz.
She was vomiting and scared but didn't utter a sound. He then wrapped the rope around her neck 3 times so tightly that it burrowed under the young woman's skin. He excitedly continued to speak as he placed his feet on her back and pulled and tugged on the rope. Banaz clung to life until her last breath. It took the criminals more than half an hour for her to die. Caroline Good and the detectives who had seen much could not hold back tears as they realized the horror that innocent Banaz had endured. At the time of Banaz's abuse, her cousin, 30-year-old Dana Amin, was in the house and helped the perpetrators push Banaz's body into a suitcase. Ari Mahmoud dragged him out of the house to a waiting auto nearby. Hama added that a police car drove by, but its crew did not pay attention to the suitcase, which had hair and an elbow sticking out of it. The very people who were supposed to protect her from harm plotted her murder, strangled her with a shoelace, stuffed her body into a suitcase. The perpetrators then took the gruesome luggage outside London, with scraps of conversation mentioning a derelict house with a garden in Birmingham. Caroline Good matched the information she received with the movement data of the arrestees' phones and determined the search area. Given the vastness of the area, the work could take a long time, but to help the investigation again came to the aid of the criminals themselves, who turned out to be quite talkative and literally reveled in the act of retribution. During the conversation, one of them suddenly asked the accomplices if they had put the freezer back in its place. Now Good knew exactly what she had to look for. A police helicopter was dispatched to search, and while repeatedly circling the area, it spotted a house whose backyard was littered with a pile of trash. Among the black garbage bags, a white oblong object that looked very much like a freezer stood out as a bright spot. A close inspection of the suspicious house on the ground confirmed the hunch. Setting aside the heavy equipment, the police officers began digging. In shifts, they dug, But when the depth of the hole reached their shoulders, the policemen were ready to give up. All except Caroline Good. She clearly remembered the words of Mohammed Hamma, who had cheerfully expressed in front of relatives that he had buried her so deep that they would only be able to find her with the help of an informer. The inspector convinced everyone to extend the search for one more day, and late in the evening of April 28, 2006, the suitcase was found. Banaz's remains were in extremely poor condition, so only dental records and DNA samples could be used to identify her. Her body, folded into a fetal position and hidden in a suitcase, was buried under a freezer in the garden of a house in Birmingham. On May 1, 2006, the suspects were charged. They were all convinced that they had done exactly the right thing and showed no remorse. Mohammed Hamma smugly declared that the case would never go to trial because he was carrying out an act of retaliation. Caroline Good did have to face a new wave of opposition organized by the Kurdish diaspora. After the discovery of Banaz's remains, the police received a flood of those wishing to provide the criminals with alibis, all of whom claimed that on the day of the alleged death of the woman, the suspects were in public and could not have committed such a crime. In total, the case involved 50 people involved in one way or another in Banaz's death. Caroline Good later recalled those events this way: "I felt nothing but anger, disgust, and contempt for these men. 50 men had actually participated in the murder of one woman, and they were proud of their masculinity." In early March 2007, London's Central Criminal Court began hearing cases against Boubacar Mahmoud, Ari Mahmoud, and Mohammed Ham. Prosecutor Victor Temple, during the trial, described the crime as a cold-blooded and heartless execution that was ordered by the victim's father and uncle. In June 2007, a jury unanimously found all 3 guilty of the charges and not deserving of leniency. The father was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years, the uncle received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years, and cousin Mohammed Hamma also received life imprisonment, but with a minimum term of 17 years. Delivering the verdict, Judge Brian Barker said, "In order to restore your so-called family honor, you have decided that she must die and her memory must be erased. This is a barbaric and heartless crime. What honor is there in a father putting his status in society above the life of his own flesh and blood?" But what could these words mean to the ruthless criminals who had long carefully planned to rid themselves of the fictitious disgrace? 4 months after the trio's conviction, the London police were notified that Muhammad Ali had been arrested for a crime against a boy in Iraq. He had taken his life. The leadership of Scotland Yard had to make a lot of efforts for his extradition, because previously Iraq never agreed to such measures and did not extradite its citizens. But the British managed to get their way, and in June 2009, Ali was extradited to the United Kingdom. Omar Hussein, the last of the 5 perpetrators, was hiding in the Iraqi countryside, trying not to be seen by the public. In December 2009, during an argument with one of his brothers, he was shot in the leg and had to seek medical attention. He was arrested at the hospital by the police who were called, and after his discharge, they began preparing him for extradition. Initially, Hussein claimed that he had not been in London in 2005, and therefore he could not be involved in Banaz's death. However, this was contradicted by UK Social Security records, according to which he was receiving refugee benefits at the time without delay. In March 2010, Hussein was extradited. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. Dana Amin, who was in the house at the time of Banaz's murder, was sentenced to 8 years in prison for helping to dispose of the victim's body and obstructing justice. Banaz's recorded interview at the police station at one of her addresses proved her family's guilt. She once handed over a letter to a South London police station in which she gave the names of men she said were ready to kill her and her boyfriend Rahmat, with whom she had been seen kissing. The people she refers to and names were members of her family and the wider Iraqi Kurdish community, enraged by Banaz's decision to divorce a man who acted as if she was a dirty shoe to be worn whenever they wanted. She tried to leave him several times, but returned to try again, at the insistence of her family. The indifference of the police in this case, which cost the life of a young woman, has led to a significant change in the way such honor cases are handled today. Following the death of Banaz Mahmod, an inquiry into police misconduct was launched. An independent commission prosecuted 9 police officers for their inadequate response to allegations made by Banaz. 7 of them received reprimands and 2 were dismissed. Worth highlighting in this case is the tenacious team of Caroline Good, who was able not only to find Banaz's body, but also to secure the conviction of her father and uncle, and to bring back the escaped criminals from Iraq. Unfortunately, this would not bring the marvelous Banaz back to life, nor would it change the fact that the people on Earth who were the worst for her were her relatives, who by basic instinct should be her most important protectors. Banaz was buried in the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery in Morden. A memorial service for Banaz was held on June 26, 2007 at the Morden Auditorium, followed by a granite memorial headstone at her grave. Her family did not attend either service. Few people, including Ramat Suleimani, Caroline Good, and Banaz's 2 sisters, came to honor the memory of the unfortunate woman. The memorial was paid for by law enforcement officials working on the Banaz case and the Women's Rights Organization.
Ramat Suleimani, who remained in the UK under the Witness Protection Program, never recovered from the death of Banaz. He wrote a letter of condolence to his deceased beloved, telling her that she was the love of his life. No, she was just the whole world to him. In May 2016, 10 years after the crime, he hanged himself. This marked his 3rd attempt to end his life. There is little evidence of the extent of the problem with the police, as the law is not required to record honor crimes. The Association for the Protection of Women's Rights in Iran and Kurdistan reported that police recorded more than 2,800 cases of honor-based violence in 2010. However, an organization set up to support victims of honor crimes and forced marriages said that more than half of the 600 calls they received each month, though unattended due to insufficient evidence. The UN estimates there were 5,000 honor killings worldwide in 2000, the worst form of censure against women who are perceived to have dishonored a family or community. While most cases are in South Asia or the Middle East, and in predominantly Muslim communities, cases such as that of 19-year-old Banaz Mahmod have highlighted tensions in immigrant communities trying to adjust to changing lifestyles. Some groups suggest that thousands of honor crimes go unnoticed in minority communities in Britain. Hundreds more women are taken abroad where they are forced into marriage or seriously harmed when their changed outlook on life puts them in conflict with their traditional male communities. Banaz Mahmod Bakabir Aga, a young woman of Kurdish descent, died on January 23, 2006, for the honor of her family. Her older sister, Bahal, urged other women in the same situation as her and her sister not to be afraid to seek help before it was too late. Even today, she continues to fear for her life, lives at a secret address, and never goes outside without a long black veil that covers her entire body and face except for her eyes. After all, even running away or living a secret life takes place in constant fear of being found, and from Banaz's story, it is obvious that there simply could not be a happy ending. Oriental women probably absorb submission and dependence on men with their mother's milk, accepting their will over and over again, whatever it may be. The Metropolitan Police team responsible for the investigation and for finding Banaz's body and filing a case against those involved in her murder has won an award for their work in detective investigation. Chief Inspector Caroline Good was awarded the Royal Police Medal for her work in leading the investigation. The videotape, which had long gone unnoticed by the public for 7 years, has become crucial evidence for investigators after warnings about the dangers faced by the young woman went largely unheeded. A camera set up in the corner of a police interrogation room captured the young woman's nervousness as she brushes her hair away from her face and begins to tell her grim story. Banaz Mahmod quietly and in detail describes the violence and oppression at the hands of her abusive husband. She tells of intimidation by men on the street whom she recognizes, Then, finally, she warns of her impending death because of the dishonor she has brought upon her family. "Until now, they follow me," Miss Mahmod says in ragged English with a strong Iraqi accent, for she has lived in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq. "This is the main reason I came to the police station. In the future, at any time, if something happens to me, it will be them." Then the camera turns off, the lights go out, and total darkness sets in. In March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States. The entire world began to shut down, and people were gripped with shock and fear of an unknown disease. On March 23rd, 12-year-old daughter Gretchen Anthony, who was visiting her father at the time, received a text message from her mother. "Good morning. I have tested positive for the coronavirus. That means I will have to stay home for at least 2 weeks." "Okay, I really hope you feel better," Ava replied. Shortly thereafter, the mom stopped sharing the location of her phone with her daughter. Over the next 3 days, friends and family members received several text messages describing Gretchen's deteriorating condition. What was strange was that no one could reach the 51-year-old woman. She didn't even call her beloved young daughter, which was very unlike a loving mom. Those close to her began to suspect a scenario far worse than even an acute case of COVID-19. Someone else was sending messages from Gretchen's phone to cover up her disappearance. The police got involved, and soon it became clear to investigators looking for Gretchen that someone was indeed using the pandemic to cover up the woman's disappearance. Gretchen was born on January 8, 1969, in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. She spent most of her life up north, attending fashion school in New York City before moving to New Jersey, where she eventually became a teacher. In 2006, the blue-eyed blonde moved to Jupiter, the northernmost city in Palm Beach County, Florida. After working in the county's private schools for 8 years, Gretchen decided to try something new and took a job in the Human Resources Department of Viking Utility, an electrical contractor. The position allowed her to interact with new people, which Gretchen enjoyed. She considered the workforce her second family. Her first marriage didn't work out, but the former spouses remained on good terms and continued to raise their beloved daughter with shared custody. Gretchen led an active lifestyle and spent a lot of time in sports. It was through sports that she met David Anthony. Charismatic, able to charm, David, who was 7 years younger than Gretchen, first became her personal trainer and then her second husband. Women from all over the county came to see the young, muscular trainer. David was a star in the gym and was very popular, attracting many new students. Gretchen fell in love. The romance developed rapidly. After a brief engagement, the couple got married at the Eldest Chapel in Las Vegas. So in 2015, Gretchen Stoughton Crane became Gretchen Stoughton Anthony and found, in her opinion, the husband of her dreams. Gretchen's daughter adored her stepfather and even called him Bonus Dad. In total, the couple lived in marriage for 5 years. However, the relationship that began with magic and perfect happiness gradually turned into a woman's fear for her safety. When tragedy struck, police and later journalists began to inquire about the identity of the second spouse. They were in for a lot of surprises. As it turned out, David Ethan Anthony was originally known as David Anthony Deutsch, and then later changed his name. David Anthony Deutsch, a star college basketball player, was arrested in 1997 for robbing a Blockbuster video store with a water pistol and assaulting a police officer. In each case, he took a plea bargain and spent some time in jail. Growing up without a father in Palm Beach Gardens, David spent much of his childhood and adolescence alone. He didn't talk much, was withdrawn, had low self-esteem, and was bullied at school for being overweight. He wasn't even allowed to join a recreational sports league because he was so much larger than all the other kids. Not surprisingly, as a teenager, David struggled with severe depression and developed symptoms that his family believed were consistent with bipolar disorder.
However, he refused to take any medication, devoted himself fanatically to sports, and really excelled at it. After high school, David received a scholarship to play college basketball and became a star on the team. He idolized basketball greats and even named his husky Kobe after his favorite basketball player, Kobe Bryant. On January 26, 2020, the idol will die in a helicopter crash, and this event will be another reason for David's unstable behavior. In the meantime, The smart, attractive coach ignores mental problems, bathes in deserved popularity, and becomes the husband of Gretchen. The couple lead an active lifestyle. David enjoys bicycling, deep-sea fishing, and kayaking. Gretchen works out hard at the gym, goes to the beach, kayaks, and does yoga. Unfortunately, only the first 2 years of marriage will prove to be happy. The remaining 3 years, the smiling blonde will spend trying to leave. Gretchen admitted to friends that her husband's behavior was becoming more and more manic, and at times he insulted her. They once even broke up for at least 6 months but got back together. Tabitha Hopkins, David's former boss at the gym, later recalled noticing strange mood swings in David. In 2017, things got so bad that Tabitha was forced to fire him for his aggressive behavior, especially towards women. David was indeed behaving very strangely and was unwilling to seek help. The man became obsessed with the end of the world and loaded 3 large bags of rice, several pots, pans, and 10 pairs of shoes into his truck in 2018. His family believed this episode was a symptom of bipolar and manic-depressive disorder. Bad periods were followed by good ones in which David tried to do something about his behavior. He even managed to get Tabitha Hopkins to give him his job back by assuring the gym owner that he was trying to be a better person and attending self-improvement seminars. Tabitha softened. There was no denying David's effectiveness as a trainer. The clients were delighted with him. Over time, as the mental illness continued untreated, David's condition worsened. Gretchen recognized that her husband had problems and shared this with friends. Sometimes, she said, she would lock herself in their bedroom just to increase the distance between them. "I noticed this crazy look in his eyes," she texted a friend, Dawn, one morning in late December. David was gaining momentum, and the spouse didn't know what he was capable of. "I'm watching him on the cameras and waiting for him to go to bed," Gretchen wrote another evening. "Then I'll go downstairs, get a knife, and put it under my pillow, just in case, and hopefully sleep." That same year, on Christmas Eve, Gretchen couldn't find her personal belongings. She searched the house, looked in David's backpack, and found her wedding ring, passport, driver's license, credit cards, and some money. The incident so disturbed Gretchen that she texted Dawn, her boss and friend, that she was afraid of her own husband. By the end of the month, Gretchen made the decision to end the tumultuous relationship. In December 2019, she forced David to move out of the townhouse to her mother's house, who lived nearby, and changed the locks. It was during this time that David's colleagues noticed a gradual change in his behavior. Most of the time, the trainer was one of the first to arrive at the gym, but after the events in the family, he began to come later and later, seemed more and more withdrawn and sullen. On January 26th, Kobe Bryant, David's idol, dies. When Kobe Bryant passed away, something happened, Tabitha recalls. "You'd think David and Kobe Bryant were best friends. He was traumatized by it." In the days that followed, David was hysterical, crying and wailing in front of the fitness club groups he led and refusing to go home. Despite his emotionally fragile state, David took an active role in a controversial self-improvement program called Gratitude Training, which critics likened to a cult. He spent thousands of dollars on seminars, but refused to tell his family what he was doing during the sessions. David's behavior regressed. On February 24th, he failed to show up for work. When Tabitha tried to find out if he was okay, he attacked her, and the supervisor made the decision to terminate the employee permanently. This time, Tabitha caught a glimpse of David's frightening rage and was truly frightened. Hopkins texted Gretchen about the incident and asked her to be careful. "That's the last time I talked to Gretchen," she would later say. 4 days later, on February 28th, 2020, just weeks before her disappearance, Gretchen files for divorce. David's stability is rapidly going downhill, and he is becoming increasingly hostile. On March 7th, the woman David had begun dating booked a seat at an unusual art class. They were to drink wine and draw pictures under the guidance of the instructor. However, the evening did not go according to plan. When David wished to hug his companion during the class and she rejected the attempt, he jumped up, yelled at her in the middle of the class, and ran outside. David's behavior frightened the young woman, and she decided not to continue the interaction, telling him that he could not stay with her tonight. When they got to the house where David had left his truck, it became clear that David had different ideas about the matter. David, whom she'd only known for a month, had decided to move in with her. Duffel bags filled with men's clothes were spread out on her bed and dining room table, and food from his mother's house was stashed in the freezer. Kobe, David's husky, was running around in the backyard. David left only after a new friend called her neighborhood security company. When Gretchen went missing, her family told investigators that David was returning to her home after he left. The young woman was concerned for her safety and installed surveillance cameras throughout the house and garage. On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. A few days later, David, believing the pandemic to be an end-of-the-world prophecy, showed up at Gretchen's house in the early morning hours. He believed the world was coming to an end and walked around the windows trying to convince his almost ex-wife to go with him to Costa Rica, where he thought they could escape the virus. After a few hours, Gretchen relented and allowed David into the house. That evening, a patrolling police officer noticed David, visibly nervous and sweaty, strutting around outside a Riviera Beach restaurant and at one point approaching a group of teenage girls. The officer noticed David's license plate, partially covered with black duct tape, and headed toward him. David claimed that his 12-year-old stepdaughter had taped the license plate and began to act even more nervous. The man ignored the police officer's orders not to move, yanked open the door of his truck and began searching for something under the seat. Fearing what would happen next, the officer pointed a gun at David and ordered him to the ground. When the officers looked under the driver's seat where David was trying to reach, they found a large knife. David was arrested for resisting arrest, but posted bail a few days later and was released. The pandemic was gaining momentum. In the early 20s of March, some states began banning people from leaving their homes. Gretchen, like everyone else, was trying to figure out how to live in the new realities. She shared informational videos about the virus and how to stay safe, posting memes and jokes mocking the absurdity of the new normal. On Thursday, March 19th, she posted a quote from a meditation blog. "When there is chaos around you, the wisest choice is to create peace within yourself." After that, her profile was no longer active, and she stopped answering calls and messages. This moment divided life into before and after for all of her near and dear ones. Texting from Gretchen Anthony's phone to friends and family began on March 23, 2020. Over the course of several days, friends and family received a series of messages from Gretchen stating that she was quarantined at home, then describing her deteriorating condition and hospitalization in the emergency room at Jupiter Medical Center. Another message claimed she was transferred to another CDC facility that did not exist. On March 24th, Don Paris, Gretchen's supervisor and friend, received a message from her saying, "I tested positive for coronavirus early this morning. This is bad news, but I am at a coronavirus CDC treatment center that only handles COVID cases. The good news is that my blood type can potentially be used in treatment. I'm not sure if you remember when I said I have a strain of mad cow disease in my blood. Well, that strain is important for gathering more answers and finding a cure. For safety reasons, Dr. Sinclair and her team strongly encourage program participants to keep contact only with immediate family members. I chose my mom. Gretchen's ex-husband, who had his 12-year-old stepdaughter visiting, also began receiving messages from Gretchen saying that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, had quarantined her. She could be placed in a medically induced coma, and she would no longer be able to write. Jeff Dreyer didn't believe these reports. He was confused by the multiple text errors and abbreviations. The manner of speech in the messages sounded more like David Anthony, and Jeff became alarmed. In addition, it bothered everyone who received these messages that no one, not even his daughter Gretchen, never called. Friends couldn't imagine Gretchen dying of anything, since at 51 she was in good shape and took her health very seriously. When calls to the medical center confirmed that Gretchen Anthony had not been admitted there, the family along with friends decided to contact the police to check if their loved one was doing well. Gretchen Anthony's boss told police that she was last at work on March 20th, and when he called her insurance company to see if she was receiving medical care anywhere, they said there had been no referrals under her policy to process treatment. Jupiter Police Detective Jared Kennerson contacted Jupiter Medical Center and found that the hospital's records did not mention anything about such a patient. In fact, Police found that Gretchen had not been to Jupiter Medical Center since 2008. Police checked the medical center parking lot and found a Mini Cooper in the parking lot. In the car, Gretchen's purse was lying in the most visible spot, causing patrol officers to become concerned. Officers went to the missing person's home. What they discovered at Gretchen's home was alarming and turned a simple visit into a potential murder investigation. A neighbor approached the officers and gave them the disturbing information. Early Saturday morning on Saturday, March 21st, I heard a very desperate female screaming as if she was being attacked. And then I heard her scream, "No!" And then I heard something like, "It hurts. Stop." The scream was really serious. Unfortunately, Gretchen didn't call emergency services. Some people are just wary of calling the police. Officers became even more concerned when another neighbor told them he later noticed a soapy substance leaking from under Gretchen's garage door. The front door leading to the garage was locked, and the key was broken in the deadbolt. When officers were able to open the door, they detected a strong, pungent odor of cleaning product in the garage. Using body cameras, patrol officers searched the house several times. They found evidence of a violent struggle, a broken picture frame, shards of glass on Gretchen's bed, and a soiled towel. Officers noticed that surveillance cameras inside the house had been removed from the walls, possibly to destroy compromising evidence, and sent a request to a service provider to recover the footage from the cloud. Police officials made inquiries and discovered that a neighbor had taken a photo of a black Nissan pickup truck parked outside Gretchen's home after the terrifying screams. The exact same pickup truck was owned by Gretchen's almost ex-husband, David Anthony, who suddenly decided to leave. His mother told police that her son packed up his truck and hit the road on Tuesday, March 24, 2020, saying he was going to Costa Rica. Their suspicions were heightened when they saw on video taken in the parking lot of Jupiter Medical Center, where Gretchen's car was found, a Mini Cooper pull into a parking space, and a tall figure, the height of David Anthony, emerge from the vehicle. Investigators began tracking Gretchen's cell phone and found that it was registered in the Pensacola, Florida area. As would later be confirmed, David had driven just 600 miles to Pensacola, Florida's westernmost city. After stopping at a couple of local pawn shops to sell some women's jewelry, he and his dog, Kobe, continued west, stopping for one night at a hotel in Pecos, Texas, before settling in Las Cruces, New Mexico. While 2,000 miles away, David contacted detectives and reported that Gretchen was alive and in no danger. He explained that his spouse had provided him with a written statement, which he read aloud over the phone. According to the statement, Gretchen discovered financial crimes at her job and fled Florida with David, fearing for her life. The statement also said she also fled from her first ex-husband, Jeff. Detectives didn't believe it and continued to investigate. They tracked Gretchen and David's cell phone signals, which indicated that the two phones were together. Expecting the worst, detectives obtained a warrant to impound the truck on March 29th and enlisted the help of Las Cruces police to arrange a traffic stop. Las Cruces police detained David, seized the truck and property, including his phone and Gretchen's phone, but they still didn't have enough evidence to call him in for questioning. He was allowed to just walk away. On March 30th, 2020, Jupiter police obtained electronic records from Gretchen's home, and investigators finally learned the truth. On the morning of March 21st, David lurked silently on the porch overlooking the back of the garage. In his hands, he held an elongated object. 6 minutes later, Gretchen appeared in the footage. The video shows David forcibly driving her into the garage, and a scream can be heard over the footage. First, Gretchen yelled to the Amazon Alexa device in the garage, "Alexa, turn on the lights in the garage." The surveillance camera audio then captured a muffled thud and Gretchen's muffled screams. She then yelled to Alexa again, "Alexa, call 911. Gretchen didn't know that unless she specifically programmed her smart speaker to call 911, the device wouldn't call the police in an emergency. After a while, David's face appeared in the frame, his hands wearing gloves. In one shot, Gretchen's bloody head could be seen as he walked around the garage. Investigators have seen enough. On March 30th, detectives get a warrant for David's arrest. Gretchen's case went from being a missing persons case to a murder investigation. Detective Kennerson rushed to Las Cruces. Shortly before midnight, March 31st,
Police arrested David outside a convenience store. Jupiter detectives questioned him at the state police headquarters in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They had one goal: to get David to reveal the whereabouts of Gretchen's body. And the detectives failed. David claimed that Gretchen was alive. In fact, during the interrogation, David Anthony made this claim 35 times. Detectives even tried using a voice recording of Gretchen's daughter, whom David really loved. With her father's permission, the girl recorded her request. "David, it's Ava. I love you. I'm scared. I miss my mom," she told him. "I need to know where my mom is. Please do the right thing and tell me where my mom is. Please. I love you." Detectives played the tape to David, but he remained indifferent. While behind bars, he refused to say anything about what had happened to Gretchen. In his typical restraint, he remained silent for months. David knew it would be difficult for the prosecutor to get a conviction without Gretchen's body. He was charged with second-degree murder and extradited to Florida. While David was in custody in Palm Beach County, Florida, a grand jury indicted him for kidnapping and upgraded the murder charge from second-degree to first-degree murder. This was a turning point, and in December 2020, after 8 months in prison, the criminal took a plea deal with the prosecutor. The fact is that he could have faced the death penalty for first-degree murder. Under the terms of the deal, David would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 38-year prison sentence. The main condition of the deal was that he would lead investigators to Gretchen's body. On December 21st, 9 months after Gretchen Anthony disappeared, David Anthony admitted what everyone already knew. He killed his wife. Gretchen's body was found wrapped in a blanket 3 miles from her home, in the woods behind a Walmart store and near a nursing home.
Investigators determined she died from stab wounds to her neck and torso. There were several defensive wounds. She was fighting for her life. At the sentencing hearing, David Anthony said the COVID-19 pandemic was a contributing factor to his crime because he saw the pandemic as Armageddon from which he had to flee. "My delusions saw the COVID pandemic as a prophecy of the end of the world, an Armageddon that I felt compelled to avoid at all costs." Under the terms of the plea agreement, David Anthony was sentenced to 38 years in prison on January 14, 2021. He is currently serving his sentence at the Martin Correctional Institution in Florida. The reverse side of goodness sometimes has irreparable consequences, but people still continue to do good deeds and do not wait for reciprocal gratitude. In our story, a sincere act done years earlier not only completely changed the lives of all the heroes, but also resulted in death. At 4:45 a.m. on March 2, 2018, Travis County, Texas police officers received a call from a woman seeking help. She reported that she was hiding in a closet when she heard several gunshots in the house, and the likely gunman was still inside. During the phone call, the dispatcher asked the woman not to come out of hiding and to wait for police officers who were on their way to the house. Minutes later, the house was already cordoned off by police, and the woman in the closet turned out to be local resident Corey Shaunessy. The woman's condition was very discouraging. Corey did not understand what had happened and was very frightened. In the kitchen, her husband Theodore Shaunessy was lying in a pool of his own blood near the table. Sit back, because today we are investigating another tragic case together. Theodore Shaunessy was born February 7, 1963, and was the youngest child in a large family Shaunessy who lived in Arizona near Phoenix. Ted, from an early age, loved fast cars and everything associated with them. As a teenager, he literally dreamed of sports cars. Theodore grew up absolutely fearless man, for whom adrenaline was the best way to cheer up and feel the taste for life. Nevertheless, he was a kind and cheerful guy, a good friend, and a good son. At the age of 20, Ted met Corey Garman at a local arcade. The young men immediately liked each other, as they had a lot in common, including a love of jewelry and books. Sympathy quickly turned into true love, and in 1989, they were married. After their marriage, the Shaunessy couple moved to Austin, Texas, where they quickly settled in and launched the family business opening Gallery Jewelers. It was a high-level operation that the Shaunessy family built together. Corey had a passion for gemstones, fine art, and worked as an appraiser for the entire family company. Ted, on the other hand, was the face of the store, as he had a talent for connecting with people, and they were not just drawn to him, but were infused with his energy. He was very friendly and active, because wherever he went, he became the soul of the company. This quality perfectly helped in business, as he could find a common language with clients and partners and achieve the best conditions for all parties. The business became quite successful, and after a while, the family fortune was estimated at $8 million. But despite the wealth, Theodore always remained generous and attentive to others. He often bought food for the needy and regularly made donations to charitable foundations. The family business continued to grow, and the couple purchased a beautiful new home near their store. The couple complemented each other and seemed like the perfect tandem. Indeed, everything seemed almost perfect, if only for one thing. The couple had no children. As the jewelry business grew, Ted and Corey decided to expand their family as well. In 2000, they made a life-changing decision and adopted a 16-month-old boy, taking him from an orphanage in Ukraine. It was just instant and unconditional love. The little gray-eyed boy was named Nicholas. Such a long-awaited event completed the family life of Shaunessy, because now they had everything for absolute happiness. Nicholas grew up an active and obedient child. He loved animals and cars, just like his dad Ted, because he often took the boy with him to the track. Father and son went karting together, rode sports cars, and regularly spent time together just walking in the park. In high school, Nicholas became interested in car dismantling and even launched his own small business, in which his parents helped him with finances. The young man bought the necessary equipment and enlisted the help of friends. In the same period of time, Nicholas met Jackie Edison. Immediately after meeting, the young people felt a mutual attraction, but after meeting Nicholas's parents, they did not like the young lady. Corey felt that she was not suitable for him, but despite this, no one prevented the relationship of teenagers in order not to lose touch with Nicholas. After a while, Jackie was able to win their favor and started spending so much time at the Shaunessy house that they let her move in. In August 2017, Nick and Jackie moved away from his parents to start a new life in College Station. She at school and he as a day trader, with financial support from his parents. The young man was very attached to his parents and tried not to cut ties with his family and made the 2-hour trip to Austin every weekend to visit them. Everything seemed to be going well in his life, and nothing seemed to portend trouble. On March 2, 2018, at 4:30 a.m., Ted and Corey awoke to the insistent barking of their dogs. This was generally a common occurrence, as the animals often reacted violently to small animals that might accidentally wander onto the family home's property. Corey thought there was nothing to worry about, and the dogs would quiet down in a few minutes, but Ted decided to check it out. He armed himself with his .40 caliber pistol and went to check the house. Corey laid her head on the pillow and almost immediately fell back asleep. It was only a few seconds later, however, that she heard a gunshot in the kitchen, followed by a series of more shots. Frightened, Corey grabbed her revolver, which was always next to the bed, and went to help her husband. But on her way out of the bedroom, she saw her favorite dog. A dog named Bart had been shot in the doorway. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared in it and looked menacing. Corey was frightened and fired indiscriminately, firing all 6 bullets toward the door. Unloading the revolver, she hid in a closet expecting to be found and killed. Luckily, Corey was able to grab her cell phone and called emergency services to report that a criminal had broken into the house. She said she shot one of the attackers and heard moans coming from the room. While speaking with the dispatcher, the frightened woman repeated that someone was moaning, but she didn't know who was making the sounds and wanted to check. However, the dispatcher calmed her down and told her not to leave the shelter and to wait for the police. 15 minutes later, she was informed that the police had arrived at the house. By this point, the moans had died down and there was a sepulchral silence in the house. Corey stepped out of the closet and headed for the front door. As she passed the kitchen, she saw her husband in a pool of blood. He showed no signs of life, and shell casings were scattered around him. Overcome with terror, she reached the door and opened it, but there was no one on the doorstep. Coincidentally, the officers had the wrong house, as this street had an unusual precinct layout. The officers were on her neighbor's doorstep, trying to figure out which side of the street the shots were coming from. Eventually, they sorted themselves out and ran to the Shaunessy family home. Waiting for them on the doorstep was a shaking Corey. Her life was completely ruined. She didn't understand what had happened. The police officers went inside and tried to calm the woman down. Corey called her son and reported the attack. She and Jackie immediately left for Austin and arrived at her parents' home around 8 a.m. Theodore Shaunessy, 55, was dead after being shot multiple times in the head, back, and thigh. Family acquaintances and friends were horrified by what had happened. No one suspected that they could have deadly enemies capable of being shot at point-blank range in such cold blood in the middle of the night in their own home. After the tragedy, Nick and Jackie stayed in the house with Corey to give her the support she needed and to participate in the investigation. Law enforcement officers examined the crime scene. 2 different types of .40 and .38 caliber shell casings were found, which means the shooting was from 2 different guns. No signs of forced entry were found, but in the far bedroom, an open window with the safety netting removed drew attention. The perpetrators must have entered through it. Here, the forensic team also managed to find the first fingerprint, which was immediately sent to the laboratory for examination. Police spoke to several neighbors about the Shaunessy family and if they saw anything suspicious. One neighbor told police that this was not the first time Shaunnessy's home had been targeted, as they own a chain of jewelry stores. The police took Corey's pajamas, which she was wearing, for examination, and also swabbed her hands for gunshot residue. Corey was honest from the beginning about the fact that she had fired her gun. The police began their investigation and quickly ruled out burglary, noting no forced entry and no stolen valuables. Shifting their attention to the murder investigation, they found that all the doors in the house were intact except for the entrance to Nicholas Shaugnessy's room. The door had been opened. An examination of the room revealed that a firearm was missing from a dresser with a .40 caliber pistol drawer. It turned out to be the only item missing from the house. Given that the caliber matched one of the guns used in the massacre, detectives assumed it was the one used to kill Ted. Nick, Jackie, and Corey agreed to help the investigation in any way they could. Corey allowed the police to search her cell phone, and although Nick said he hadn't been in Austin in about a month, he and Jackie did the same. All 3 also agreed to answer questions at the station. The goal of the police was simply to try to get as much information as possible about the family and the events of that day to get on the trail of the perpetrators. Investigators were still unsure if the murder was part of a random attack, a botched robbery, or if it was a targeted crime. They found no unidentified prints at the scene, so they had to wonder if the sole surviving victim, Corey Shaunessy, could actually have been a suspect. After all, she was the only person in the house. The police couldn't get past the fact that the shooters left Corey alive. They also found it odd that the shooters were in the house for 17 minutes before the shooting occurred, and nothing was stolen from the house. Assistant prosecutor Amy Meredith, who examined the scene of the tragedy, was certain that Ted Shaunessy knew the attacker. She was also certain that the house was too big and too dark for a couple of random burglars or jewelry thieves to navigate it so quickly. Corey Shaunessy was increasingly under suspicion because investigators believed she had a motive. Police learned that Corey was the beneficiary of Ted's $1 million policy. Their home and business were also worth a lot of money, but there was no evidence against Corey. But Corey wasn't the only family member who aroused suspicion. Shaugnessy's son, Nicholas, who was more than 100 miles away from the scene of the tragedy at the time of the crime, also came under suspicion. On the morning of the tragedy, he was agitated, and one important moment caught the attention of investigators. After questioning him, he walked directly to a wide-open side window on the first floor. It was the window to his room. He went to that particular side of the house to look specifically at that window, which was not visible just from the front of the house. It was the exact window that the criminals entered through, but at that point, Nick had no information from the investigators about the criminals entering through that window. After all, how would he know the point of entry if he had no part in creating it? Police dug deeper into Nicholas's financial history and discovered that he had been struggling financially for a long period of time leading up to the crime. An important revelation was that Nicholas had borrowed $30,000 from his mother for the business, and she had recently written him a message reminding him to repay the loan. In addition, he owed a neighbor $20,600. These financial stressors represented a potential motive to commit the crime. However, the investigation took a more important turn when it was discovered that Nicholas was the sole beneficiary of a $2 million insurance payout in the event that his parents did not pass away. This detail intensified the intense scrutiny on Nick, making him a prime suspect in the eyes of the police. Nicholas's phone also caught the investigators' attention, specifically an app that gave him access to the alarm system at his parents' home. Corey told them that the family often chose not to arm the system and that it was disabled that night. But detectives noticed something in the account's history. Corey said they only used the alarm system when they weren't home. However, the system detected that there was an activation to open a window at 4:27 a.m. The system detected that there was an activation to open a window. About 17 minutes later, the system detected broken glass. Another surprise in the search of the home was Nicholas and Jackie's marriage certificate. It turned out that they were secretly married back in August 2017 and didn't disclose their secret marriage until after the murder happened. But the closer police looked, the more compromising evidence they found that Nick and Jackie were indeed planning to kill Shaunnessy's parents. We remember that Nick was more than 100 miles away from Austin at the time of the crime, but phone records showed that he was lying when he said he hadn't been in Austin for a month. On February 28, just 2 days before Ted was killed, his cell phone use was recorded in Austin. Investigators wondered if he had been in town making final preparations. Nicholas and Jackie's phones were examined. They deleted several text messages that had been synchronized with Nicholas's computer. On February 24th, Nick sent Jackie a text message saying he was working on it. And Jackie's response to the text message was, "Do they want $50K or not? We can't afford to pay half that early." The police searched Nicholas and Jackie's apartment. Everyone was shocked at how many cameras were installed in the apartment. The cameras proved that they were at home on the morning of the day of the crime. They found jewelry, ammunition, and guns in the safe. One of the boxes of ammunition was the same make and caliber as one of the murder weapons. It was a .38 caliber pistol and was missing 6 bullets. In other correspondence, Nick asked Jackie to withdraw money from the account. So, if this happens, cash in hand. Jackie had withdrawn $1,000 from the bank just days before the crime. Authorities suspected it was no coincidence. During the investigation, investigators contacted the man who officiated Nick and Jackie's wedding, Nick's high school friend, Spencer Patterson. Although the attempt to contact him was quite difficult, the information obtained was another important piece of evidence to prove Nicholas's guilt. The fingerprint from the window in Nicholas's bedroom proved to be a dead end. It belonged to the man who installed the window. But police learned that Nicholas had used that window to sneak in and out of the house when he lived there. His best friend Spencer also knew about it. Spencer was interviewed by police. He also knew about where Ted and Corey kept the safe in their home. Police searched Spencer's home, car, and cell phone. In the car, police found a .38 caliber handgun. It was sent for forensics, but it was not one of the murder weapons. Spencer's cell phone also showed that he was at home the morning of the crime. Spencer was ruled out as a suspect, but he added to the piggy bank of suspicion against Nicholas. Spencer revealed that shortly before the crime, Nick talked about getting $8 million when Ted and Corey left. In correspondence between Spencer and Nicholas, Shaunessy tried to hire him to kill the family. "Steal all their stuff, no need for the mask because they will all die," Nick wrote. On May 29, 2018, police arrested Nicholas Shaunessy and Jackie Edison for criminal solicitation. Corey couldn't believe it. The woman believed the authorities were trying to frame her son, who by then was working in his father's place at the jewelry store. Corey still believed it was a mistake. She said she needed absolute proof of their involvement. 2 weeks after the arrest, Jackie was released on bail. Corey hired the best lawyer she could find for her son. After the tragedy, in an interview, Corey Shaunessy said, "You could have told me that aliens landed in the front yard, and I would have believed that rather than I would have believed that Nicholas and Jackie were planning to kill us." For months, Corey had been by Nick's side. She truly believed that maybe the kids were involved in something in College Station, where Nicholas owed someone money, or maybe there was something strange with illegal substances, or maybe he told the wrong person that his parents were jewelers. The woman was ready to believe anything but that her son was planning to kill them. But the police were certain that Nick and Jackie were behind the attack. It remained to find out who had shot Ted Shaunessy, and that was no easy task. After all, the traces and evidence have exhausted themselves, and the investigation has reached a dead end. Time passed, and 4 months after the crime, Detective James Moore decided to review the surveillance video from Nick and Jackie's porch, recorded just 2 days before the attack. For a mother who had struggled for months to keep faith in her son, this was the final straw. Too much had happened to really point to Nicholas and Jackie's involvement, and Corey realized with horror that she had spent months harboring the very people who had planned to kill Ted and her that night. Surveillance footage from the front porch of the house proved to be a major twist in the case. The footage, recorded just 2 days before the attack, shows Nick Shaunessy greeting 2 men at the front door. One of them is wearing a green t-shirt with Anderson written on it. Detectives rushed to the Anderson Window Company in search of the man from the recording. His name was Cameron Vosmek, and he wasn't home that day. But his wife answered the door, and quickly got their attention. She said that a few months earlier, a man named Johnny Leon had asked her husband to commit murder for money. But Cameron turned him down. Police ruled Vosmek out as a suspect. Johnny Leon was later called in for questioning, where he admitted that Nick had tried to hire him for $100,000, but he refused. He was arrested and revealed that he had traveled to Austin with Nicholas a few days before the crime. According to him, they parked in front of Shaunnessy's house. Nicholas walked to the house, came back, and said he couldn't get in. Johnny claimed that he was not involved in the crime after that night. However, his cell phone showed that he was in Austin on the morning of the crime. Johnny did not give the name of the second shooter, but did give his cell phone number. He had been in contact with a man named Arian Smith. Smith claimed he was with his girlfriend and that she could provide him with an alibi. His girlfriend said that on the morning of the day of the crime, Arian left her in a motel room. He left in her car, and she tried to call him several times, but the boyfriend did not answer. Arian's girlfriend told police that he had been carrying a .40 caliber handgun for several days after the crime. The gun was recovered from a member of Smith's family. Arian Smith was arrested. Police also discovered that both men had arrest records. In fact, they had been arrested together for dealing in illegal substances earlier. Nick Shaunessy and the 2 alleged killers were charged with capital murder. But by the spring of 2021, Amy Meredith left her job as an assistant district attorney. And there was a new district attorney, Jose Garza, whose office made the criminals an offer: avoid a possible death sentence by pleading guilty to a lesser charge of murder, and serve 35 years with the possibility of parole. Leon and Smith agreed. Corey wrote Nicholas a letter and offered to accept the plea bargain. The sentence would be 35 years with the possibility of parole. In April 2021, Nicholas accepted the deal. He could be released when he turned 36 years old. At a hearing in April 2021, and Nicholas Shaunessy pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 20 years of his sentence. Arian Smith and Johnny Leon were sentenced to 35 years with the possibility of parole. Arian Smith told police that after they shot Ted, he heard gunshots coming from the bedroom and a woman crying. Smith said he begged Leon not to kill Corey and to leave the house. They left because they didn't want to be shot. From prison, Nicholas sent letters to his mom. Corey was finally able to see her son after he had been in prison for 2 years. Corey knew a lot of information about Nicholas and Jackie's case, but she still didn't know who had used the .40 caliber gun because the gun belonged to Ted. In a private conversation, Nicholas revealed that he had given his father's gun to Arian Smith. When this came to light, Corey was able to finally believe that Nicholas was indeed involved in the case. Neither I, my husband, no one in our family, nor any of our friends could ever imagine that Nicholas and Jackie would want us killed. Jackie tried to downplay her involvement in planning the crime. She claimed she knew nothing about it. The police knew she was lying because, based on the deleted text messages, she knew. She admitted that she had traveled with Nicholas to Austin several times, but said she had never taken Nicholas' words about massacring her parents seriously. Jackie divorced Nicholas while he was in prison. In March 2022, Jackie's charge was changed to conspiracy to commit a felony. In June 2023, Jackie pleaded guilty to attempted conspiracy to commit a felony. She was granted a suspended sentence, meaning she could plead guilty and receive probation. She spent 120 days in jail. She will be on probation for 10 years. Every year for 10 years on the anniversary of Ted Shaunessy's murder, she will have to spend 2 days in jail. Nicholas was interviewed from prison. He said he wanted to impress Jackie and become rich. Ted Shaunessy, a registered jeweler, and his wife Corey Shaunessy, a certified gemologist appraiser, could have shared a prosperous life with their adopted son, Nicholas. Ted, who founded Gallery Jewelers in Austin in 1995, achieved success, earning the family a respected name in their community, was murdered by son Nick, who put a dollar sign on his parents' lives and decided to take away their happy life. Currently, the victim's son remains incarcerated at the Clemens Unit in Brazoria, Texas. Arian Smith is serving his sentence at the LeBlanc Unit in Beaumont of the aforementioned state. Johnny Leon remains incarcerated at the Barry B. Telford Unit in New Boston, Texas. This is a story of exemplary transformation that society opened its eyes to too late. Sometimes kindness comes at too high a cost, and the person who seemed close becomes an executioner. Ironically, the enthusiastic Shaunessy's traveled to the ends of the earth to bring home a criminal. It is a pity that they, enamored with love for the child, could not convey to their son the simple truth of life that money is the most easily replenishable resource, but time, unfortunately, is not. In an interview Nicholas gave from prison, he sincerely apologizes to his mother. But is it possible to accept an apology that shouldn't be there in the first place? Throughout the years of investigation, Corey Shaunessy has endured an incredible emotional journey to the realization that her own son hired hitmen to take her and her husband's lives for money. And she still loves her son, the same 8-year-old boy who lovingly hugs her in photos and races cars with his father. But that boy is gone forever, and so is the life Corey and Ted tried to build around him. Corey Shaunessy currently lives in another state under an assumed name, and every day that passes she tries to find faith again in the people around her. Indeed, many people are far from what they appear to be at first glance. A chilling thought visits us throughout our story. The 2 people who tried to kill you were living with you in your own home. Take a good look around you.
On July 3, 1989, another child was born in the municipality of Estreito in the state of Maranhão in Brazil. The boy was named by a common Portuguese name, Danilo. This child was not spoon-fed or stroked on the head with bedtime stories. He was not taken by the hand to school at school age. He grew up on the streets like all the children in this poor neighborhood. The environment for adults and children in Brazil's favelas is one of oppressive poverty, low living standards, and unemployment. All of these factors are the basis for street crime to thrive. When from childhood there is only dirt, poverty, lack of human conditions, and normal food, all existing instincts of self-preservation are activated. Everyone survives as they can or as they want. And unfortunately, more often than not, a person who from childhood has seen only violence and the speed of the result obtained by force will choose the same road of life because otherwise he does not know how. Our story today is about the horrific brutality and unwavering obsession that dooms people. In 2019, Sarah Brandau was excited to welcome her younger sister Deborah and 2 nephews, a boy named Ian and a girl named Jasmine, to the airport. After a failed relationship with the children's father, Deborah, 30, driven by a genuine desire and drive to provide a better life for her children, moved from Brazil to Pennsylvania to live with her sister. The family quickly settled into their new place, accustomed to the cozy home and new standard of living. Deborah Brandow and her sister Sarah were inseparable. Not only did they work together in the cleaning service, but they often talked on the phone during the day. They lived the quiet and happy life they had come to another country for. But an unexpected acquaintance changed the fates of all the heroes forever. In 2020, spending a day off with children in the park, Deborah met her compatriot, 31-year-old Danilo Cavalcante. A trusting relationship quickly developed between the young people. The man was very attentive to her and kind to her children. Deborah fell in love with her Brazilian neighbor Danilo Cavalcante and decided that she had met a suitable and trustworthy man. After a few months of their relationship, they rented a small house and began living as a full-fledged family. After a while, the hot and emotional Danilo began to get bored with the perfect family life. The closer their relationship with Deborah became, the more jealous and obsessive he became. Mistrust arising from nothing gradually turned into total control. Between the couple constantly began to erupt scandals, which ended in violence. Danilo got drunk every night and came home a completely different person. He was like an angry animal. From Deborah, he demanded complete submission and obedience, and in case of resistance, he punished her severely in front of the children. The woman was not weak. She defended herself as best she could and would not let her beloved children be harmed. Unwilling to tolerate such treatment, she returned to her sister's home, and after repeated threats, she went to the police and then to court to obtain an order of protection prohibiting Cavalcante from approaching her. Despite Deborah's numerous attempts to distance herself from Cavalcante, he pursued her fiercely, resorting to threats of violence if she dared to permanently sever the relationship. Fearing for her life, Deborah conducts a small investigation in search of answers about Danilo Cavalcante's identity. After contacting acquaintances in Brazil through social media, she finds information about Danilo's former life and the reasons for his entry into the United States. The woman realizes that her lover is not who he claims to be, and the received information throws her into shock. It turned out that on November 5, 2017, while in his native Brazil, Danilo Cavalcante fatally wounded 20-year-old student Walter Jr. Moreira dos Reis, shooting him 5 times near a restaurant in the city of Figueirópolis. An investigation revealed that the two were friends, and the killing was over Walter's car repair debt. A week after the crime, the Brazilian judicial system granted the prosecutor's office's request for preventive detention, issuing an arrest warrant. But Brazilian authorities did not have time to detain Danilo. Cavalcante was able to leave the country through Brasília International Airport because of a disagreement by the Tocantins judicial system, which did not request that the decision be registered in the National Warrant Registry until 7 months after the crime. Cavalcante entered Puerto Rico illegally. A warrant for his arrest was issued in Brazil in June 2018. After entering Puerto Rico, Cavalcante obtained a fake ID and eventually settled in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where his sister lived. After Danilo's true identity was revealed, Deborah gave him an ultimatum to either leave her alone or she would publicize his identity. This was the woman's fatal mistake. On the evening of April 18, 2021, Deborah was walking with her children in front of her house. The children were playing catch-up, and the woman was chatting quietly with an elderly neighbor. Danilo Cavalcante pulled her aside to talk. The neighbor remained waiting for Deborah and only watched the former lovers chatting. The conversation was calm, but at one point, Cavalcante pulled out 2 knives and suddenly attacked her. Deborah fell down, and he stabbed her several times. Deborah's children screamed all along the street for him not to touch their mom, but the man was in agony. He stabbed Deborah a total of 38 times. A neighbor who observed the brutal scene desperately tried to administer emergency aid and stop the bleeding. Deborah's daughter ran to the neighbor's house to ask for help and call emergency services. Deborah Brandow was taken to Pauli Hospital, but eventually died from her injuries. Meanwhile, Danilo Cavalcante fled Pennsylvania to avoid arrest, and was on the run for several hours until he was found and arrested by Virginia State Police. He was extradited to Pennsylvania, where he was placed under arrest, pending trial. On August 16, 2023, in Chester County, Danilo Cavalcante's trial for first-degree murder began. The investigation revealed that Cavalcante refused to accept the end of their relationship and had intimidated Deborah since 2020 with regular domestic violence. During Cavalcante's trial, Deborah's crying child testified, recalling over and over again the horrifying events of that bloody day. It took the jury only 15 minutes to reach a guilty verdict. Cavalcante was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was announced, Cavalcante was sent to the Chester County Jail in Pocopson, where he was awaiting transfer to a federal prison. But on August 31, 2023, at about 9 a.m., he escaped from the Chester County Jail using a chimney. Like a Spider-Man, he went up across the wall between two cramped hallways and so ascended through the chimney to the roof. Deftly bypassed the barbed wire fences and escaped. Surveillance footage showed the prisoner in the narrow space between two walls in the exercise yard. He put his arms and legs on either side and walked upwards. He then ran across the roof, climbed over the fence, and pushed through the barbed wire to freedom. Prison officials were very aware of all the vulnerabilities that had been identified in the prison after Igor Bolta's escape, and believed that they had been addressed. Officials believed that the barbed wire added after a similar escape by an inmate named Igor Bolta a few months earlier would prevent a jailbreak, said Acting Warden Howard Holland. According to court documents in May, an inmate named Igor Bolta climbed onto the roof of the jail and jumped to a less secure location. He was captured less than a mile from the prison about 5 minutes after escaping.
Again, the one thing we didn't take into account was the failure on the human factors side. We only focused on the physical infrastructure, not the human factor, Howard Holland said shortly after Cavalcante disappeared. Whoever was supposed to be monitoring the prison's 160 cells did not see the escape unfold, Holland said. A guard in a tower that overlooked the prisoners did not see Cavalcante slip away. The tower guard was first placed on administrative leave and then fired. As a matter of urgency, the prison was closed, and the search for a particularly dangerous criminal began. Alerts were everywhere. Danilo Cavalcante, age 33, black hair, possibly armed and very dangerous. The escape of a dangerous killer from state prison has gotten a lot of publicity. The search for the fugitive was broadcast daily on all media channels. The Pennsylvania State Police Chief, who led the search for Cavalcante, held regular press conferences and briefings, providing accurate information to state residents about the special operation. He urged residents not to stay on the sidelines, but to take an active role, through vigilance and observation, to help determine the perpetrator's route. And it worked. So, about a few hours after the escape, Danilo Cavalcante was spotted walking along a road about 2 miles west of the prison. With the help of reports from local residents, Cavalcante was spotted using a surveillance camera in the early morning hours of September 2nd. Police set up a search perimeter around the area, securing the roads and railroads that run through it to prevent Cavalcante's potential escape, and put up a $10,000 reward for any information leading to his capture. Authorities began searching within 2 miles of the jail in the heavily wooded area of Pocopson Township and Chester County. A local resident spotted the fugitive in a creek bed just days after the escape, but he fled into the woods before police could find him. The search continued. The search perimeter expanded after he spent about a week on the run. A security camera captured Cavalcante at Longwood Gardens, a popular botanical garden nearly 3 miles from the jail, just south of where law enforcement initially searched for him. There's a lot of ravines, a lot of high fields, a lot of grass, a lot of cover for a guy 5 feet tall and 120 pounds, Robert Clark, Deputy U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, said September 5th. In addition to the difficult, rugged terrain, searchers had a hard time coping with the extreme heat and humidity that stood for days. After a week of desperate searches for the fugitive felon, The number of officers involved in the search for Cavalcante on the ground has grown from 250 to nearly 400. "We have a large perimeter secured. We're very optimistic," the police chief said. The search team has been strengthened not only in numbers, but also in the equipment attached to the search. Helicopters flying over the search area began playing a recorded message from Cavalcante's Portuguese-speaking mother begging Cavalcante to surrender peacefully to authorities. The next morning, Cavalcante was spotted by a security camera on a property located about 2 miles south of the prison. Police moved in, set up a new perimeter around the facility, and Longwood Gardens, as well as schools in close proximity to the search area, will be closed while the search is conducted. Police continued an intensive search for the object for the rest of the week, and Longwood Gardens briefly reopened to limited access until forced to evacuate and close again after another sighting of the object on September 7th. That same day, police increased the reward for information leading to his capture from $10,000 to $20,000. After nearly a week of searching, nerves were on edge. Locals knew a man convicted of murder was on the loose, but authorities still hadn't told them how Cavalcante escaped from prison. Philadelphia residents in Chester County were asked by police to lock all doors and windows, secure vehicles, and stay indoors. CBS News reported 34-year-old Danilo Cavalcante escaped from a Pennsylvania prison.
The intense search continued until a major event on September 9th, when Cavalcante apparently broke through the search perimeter in Longwood Gardens when he was spotted on a video intercom call standing on the front porch of a former colleague's home near Phoenixville, nearly 20 miles northeast of the search perimeter. Cavalcante had a deft way of changing his appearance. He was shaved and dressed in new clothes. Danilo moved around the state with sophistication and managed to go undetected. So he stole a van from a local dairy store and drove it to Phoenixville, hoping to get help and shelter from acquaintances. On the morning of September 10th, a stolen van with an empty gas tank was found abandoned in a field in suburban East Mantmeal. The search area moved to the northern part of Chester County. The fugitives' movements again changed the search perimeter. On September 11th, as the search continued, Cavalcante was added to the Interpol list, and authorities increased the reward for information on his whereabouts. That same night, emergency services received a call from a local resident. He reported that a man similar in description had broken into the garage of his home. The homeowner was forced to open fire in self-defense and shot him 7 times. But Cavalcante was able to escape the home and steal a .22 caliber rifle with a scope and flashlight from the home. Police immediately arrived on the scene and found Cavalcante's sweatshirt and shoes in close proximity to the home. Once the identity of the perpetrator was confirmed and it was determined that the dangerous felon was now armed, police urged residents in the South Coventry neighborhood to lock all doors, windows, and vehicles and stay indoors if possible. The convicted felon is armed with a handgun and is particularly dangerous. Cavalcante's escape has alarmed many area residents. School districts canceled classes for the day after Cavalcante was spotted on surveillance video. Police expanded the search and urged residents to keep their doors locked. Police set up a new search perimeter in South Coventry Township that was tighter than previous ones, because they were certain Cavalcante was now surrounded. The search continued throughout the day on September 12th. Around 1 a.m. on September 13th, an aircraft with thermal imaging technology spotted Cavalcante in the woods. Despite the sighting, police had to wait until sunrise to approach due to inclement weather that prevented the surveillance plane from operating safely. The big breakthrough came in the early morning hours of September 13th, when authorities learned that a security alarm went off shortly after midnight within the final search perimeter. According to Bivens, an Office of Illicit Drug Enforcement aircraft using thermal imaging technology detected a heat signal in the area around 1 a.m. The alarm was triggered. Technology really played a major role in this, said Ron Johnson, a retired Missouri State Highway Patrol captain. Things went against law enforcement for a long time, but they paused in time and were able to pick up the heat signature from a DEA spy plane. Around 8 a.m. on September 13th, police found Cavalcante asleep with the rifle he had stolen from his home 2 nights earlier. Danilo Cavalcante, a dangerous criminal, attempted to escape by crawling into thick undergrowth, but a police dog named Yoda subdued him by biting his head and holding him until police arrived. Lieutenant Colonel George Bivens said at a news conference that Yoda caused Cavalcante minor head injuries during his capture. "They were able to land very quietly," Bivens said. "We have the element of surprise, and that allowed us to capture the fugitive without casualties." Cavalcante was questioned by police immediately after his capture, where he said he survived on watermelons and creek water, traveled only at night, and even once almost got caught by a police officer while hiding. Cavalcante planned to steal a car and travel to Canada. Since returning to prison, Cavalcante has been charged with multiple crimes related to his escape, including burglary, trespassing, and theft. Following the capture of high-risk felon Danilo Cavalcante, local and state officials, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, expressed gratitude to the many law enforcement officers who assisted in the search. Chester County District Attorney Deb Ryan stated, "Today is a great day here in Chester County. Our nightmare is finally over, and the good guys won. We are indebted to all first responders for their tireless and dedicated efforts to bring this fugitive to justice. They worked around the clock, and we are deeply grateful to them all." Chief George Bivens, who led the search, discussed the various challenges law enforcement officers had to overcome to find Cavalcante, noting the intense heat and thunderstorms that occurred in the area during the search, as well as the fact that each of the search perimeters established during the search were in heavily wooded areas. The search team consisted of approximately 500 law enforcement officers, including Pennsylvania State Police, FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals, who searched the area around the shooting scene. Police established a perimeter of several miles in each direction. Following Cavalcante's escape, the Chester County Jail Board, which oversees the Chester County Jail, was heavily criticized by residents in the area for failing to prevent Cavalcante's escape. Residents noted that the jail had the opportunity to make appropriate security improvements following Igor Bolte's May 19th escape attempt, and that those improvements could have potentially prevented Cavalcante's escape because he used the same method Bolte used to escape. The prison has already fired the prison guard who was on duty during Cavalcante's September 7th escape, with prison officials claiming that the guard had the opportunity to spot Cavalcante during the escape. Days after the offender's capture, the Chester County Jail announced that they had installed a tin roof over the area, where Cavalcante climbed up 2 walls to access the roof and escape, along with various other security measures and improvements. I think there are obviously questions that Chester County officials are going to have to answer as to how the suspect was able to escape, especially given the history of this prison, said Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. The communication, cooperation of all law enforcement agencies and local residents who came together during what has been such a long search for the state helped to catch and honorably punish the evil. Danilo will now never go free. Australia is one of the most magical places on Earth. It's the smallest continent, a land of eternal summer with unique flora and fauna. Its very location is unique. Australia is the only country in the world that occupies an entire continent. Many people dream of this enchanting country, isolated from the rest of the world, as a place to chase their dreams. But in our story, one grand dream was not meant to come true. On March 5th, 2021, Jasmine Core finished her work shift and headed to the car park. A young man approached her and called her aside. Jasmine knew him, so she followed without fear. The next moment, he grabbed her by the neck with his strong hand and forcefully placed her in a nearby car. Jasmine resisted. She tried to scream and ask to be let go, but the choking pressure on her neck cut off her oxygen. She went limp, and the abductor placed her in the car. He hurriedly got behind the wheel and drove away. 18-year-old Jasmine came to Australia from India in pursuit of her dream. After her father's tragic death, she dreamed of becoming a nurse to help people. She wanted to obtain a quality medical education. With her mother's blessing, she joyfully accepted her aunt and uncle's offer to move to Australia. Thus, she settled in Adelaide with her close relatives and successfully enrolled in university. Studying was hard due to the heavy workload, but Jasmine was persistent and goal-oriented, never straying from her dream. She never missed a lecture, read mountains of textbooks, and helped her classmates with notes. Thanks to her perseverance, she earned the respect of her professors and became a role model for her peers. Jasmine Core's relentless determination not only allowed her to study, but also to find a job to gain practical experience. 2 years into her studies, Jasmine Core landed a student nurse position at the Southern Cross Homes Hospital in Plympton North, a suburb of Adelaide. At a university social event, Jasmine met Tarakjot Singh. The two quickly struck up a friendship. Both being from India, they had a lot in common to talk about. Tarakjot Singh came from an ordinary Indian family. After finishing school with flying colors, he aimed for a better education and moved to Australia to pursue a bachelor's degree in information technology. A kind and empathetic young man, he studied hard and worked to afford a comfortable living in the bustling city. The young people spent a lot of time together, hanging out at work and catching up at cafes between university lectures. Over time, their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship. By April 2020, the young couple was no longer hiding their relationship and started planning a future together. Jasmine was smitten with Tarakjot's attention and care. He continuously expressed his devotion and love. Initially, it seemed like he was just very caring, but gradually his attentiveness became more intrusive. Tarakjot started inquiring about Jasmine's every move, justifying it by saying he was concerned for her well-being. Secretly, he began checking whom she was interacting with on social media, and then started demanding reports on her every step. Jasmine felt that Tarakjot's behavior had crossed all boundaries, but he managed to convince her every time that his total control was purely out of love and care. He would apologize and promise not to invade her personal space without reason, but these were just empty promises. Over time, Jasmine felt increasingly suffocated in her relationship with Tarakjot. He strongly opposed her interactions with family and friends. This isolation deeply hurt her, leading Jasmine to make a crucial decision to end the relationship and free herself from the pressure. With her family's support, Jasmine informed Tarakjot that she was ending their relationship. He reacted with fury, screaming, cursing, and threatening retribution against her family. Jasmine was emotionally drained. She took leave and went to stay with her mother in India. But even there, Tarakjot did not leave her alone. From afar, he used emotional blackmail, threatening to end his life. Tarakjot took drastic measures to capture his ex-girlfriend's attention. At one point, he attempted to end his life by consuming several packs of sleeping pills, recording the act and sending the video to Jasmine, hoping to elicit pity and compassion. However, his plan backfired, and instead of winning her back, he ended up in the hospital under medical care. After receiving the necessary therapy, Tarakjot returned to his job and studies. It appeared he had accepted the breakup with Jasmine and started a new life without her. But on March 6, 2021, Jasmine Core did not show up for work. As evening fell and darkness enveloped the streets, a car swiftly made its way through the city, adeptly avoiding surveillance cameras. After an hour's drive, the car came to a stop. The young man exited and helped the girl out. She was weak from the prolonged lack of oxygen. With cold efficiency, he retrieved tape and a cable from the trunk. Without a word, and with brute cruelty, he sealed her mouth and eyes with the tape, causing her eyelashes to stick together and pulling tightly on the delicate skin of her face. Then, the man tied her hands behind her back. She writhed in fear. Silence. There was nowhere to run. He pushed her, and when she fell, he tied her legs with the same cable. The victim moaned and squirmed on the dusty road. Her long, dark hair tangled, and her clothes became dirty. After binding her legs, he grabbed her hair and with a swift slash cut across her throat. The victim went silent. He placed the knife in a bag and carelessly lifted the immobilized girl off the ground into the trunk. Closing the lid, he lit a cigarette. He took a few puffs before getting back into the car to continue his drive. He drove through the evening and all night. Only in the early morning did his car stop at Death's Peak. The man dug a shallow grave, removed the victim from the trunk, and laid her in the ground. Thus, the young woman was buried alive by her abductor. But she was still alive. Her eyes didn't see the horror of her situation. Lying in the cold earth, trying to breathe, her nostrils filled with fine sand, the weight of the soil pressing down on her, she was unable to move. Fear and the realization of complete helplessness took over her mind. She could only moan, briefly, then she fell asleep, forever. So easily and simply, one person decided they had the right to determine another's fate. But evil must and will be punished. On March 6, 2021, Jasmine Core did not show up for work at the Southern Cross Care elderly home in North Plimpton, where she worked as a nurse without any prior warning. Her supervisor contacted her family. On the same day, she was declared missing. A search began. Surveillance footage from that evening was reviewed, but there was nothing that could aid the investigation in finding Jasmine Core. The last time the young nursing student was seen was leaving her job at Southern Cross Homes in Plimpton North around 10 p.m. on March 5th. Tarakjot Singh quickly became the prime suspect with a motive, especially since Jasmine had filed a harassment complaint against him with the police just weeks before her disappearance. When first questioned by police on March 6th, Singh claimed he couldn't remember the last time he saw Jasmine Core and insisted he was at home on the night of her death. The following day, Singh informed the officers that Jasmine had taken her own life and that he had buried her in the Flinders Ranges. He led the police to the burial site, where they discovered Jasmine's shoes, glasses, and work ID badge in a trash bin, along with zip ties. She was exhumed 2 days after Tarakjot Singh was interrogated by the police at Morialta Creek, 40 kilometers north of Hawker, approximately 100 meters from the road and nearly a 5-hour drive from the location he allegedly took her. Tarakjot Singh was arrested and held in custody pending trial. Investigators determined that in the days leading up to her disappearance, Tarakjot Singh had meticulously prepared for the abduction and death of the young woman. It was found that on the day of the kidnapping, Singh had purchased zip ties, tape, and rope from a hardware store. Searches conducted at the residence where Tarakjot lived uncovered several SIM cards and phones, proving that he had carefully planned the abduction, even going as far as changing his SIM card to fabricate an alibi. On the night of the abduction, Singh switched cars with his apartment neighbor and asked him to cover his shift, then headed to the elderly home where Jasmine was working that day. Initially, Singh was charged with failing to report a death to the coroner before the charge was upgraded to homicide. Following the investigation, 21-year-old Tarakjot Singh from Coralta Park was charged with the homicide of 21-year-old Jasmine Core after her body was found buried at Morialta Creek. Singh first appeared via video link before the Port Augusta Magistrates Court on March 9th, where Judge Gregory Fisher ordered the accused's name and face to be withheld for 30 days. In July 2021, hearings in the Jasmine Court case began under Judge Adam Kimber in the Supreme Court. It emerged during the hearings that Singh was in Australia on a student visa and had spent time in a short-term psychiatric ward that year. Prosecutors told the Supreme Court that 21-year-old Jasmine Core was assassinated a month after she reported her ex-partner Tarakjot Singh for stalking her. Singh pleaded guilty to the of Jasmine Core in March 2021, and the details of his crime were outlined during the sentencing. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo stated that Jasmine Core endured absolute terror after Singh abducted her from her workplace in Adelaide on March 5, 2021. The court heard Jasmine Core suffered an extraordinary level of cruelty after her former boyfriend kidnapped her, bound her with tape and zip ties, and buried her alive with her eyes bound and conscious at Death's Peak, near Hawker in the Flinders Ranges. Evidence provided by the pathologist who conducted Jasmine's autopsy indicated that Singh made superficial cuts to her throat, but these did not cause her death. An autopsy report presented showed Jasmine Core died on March 6, 2021, several hours after being buried. Horrific details emerged during the sentencing at the Supreme Court. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo stated she had to be acutely aware of her hopeless situation, and she must have consciously suffered from what can only be described as absolute terror. Mateo also mentioned that the act was inefficient, and Jasmine Core was made to suffer. It is unknown when her throat was cut, unknown when and how she ended up in that grave or was placed there, and unknown when she was dug out, other than the accusation suggests that it must have happened while she was still alive and being prepared for burial. During the initial investigation into Jasmine Core's death, Tarek Jot denied any wrongdoing, continuously asserting that she took her own life. However, Judge Adam Kimber stated that Singh prepared a series of calculated steps over a certain period of time to commit the crime. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo informed the court that Miss Core had filed a police report claiming that Tarek Jot Singh was stalking her on February 9th, about a month before she was assassinated. She said that Singh began cold and clinical planning of Miss Core's death after their relationship ended. The manner in which Jasmine Core was murdered indeed involved an extraordinary level of cruelty, she added. Martin Anders, the attorney representing Singh's interests, stated that 2 months before the tragic incident, the Singh and Core families had a meeting that resulted in a negative decision regarding the continuation of their relationship. He also mentioned that Singh's reasoning was seriously impaired following the end of their relationship. This is not someone who was really well-grounded in terms of understanding what desires were at play, how these issues evolved, and how he might have properly reasoned in the circumstances he faced. The lawyer explained, he took actions that destroyed not only her life, but his own. Martin Anders commented on Singh's deteriorating mental health and his experiencing hallucinations following Jasmine Core's demise. However, a psychiatric evaluation concluded that Tarek Jot Singh was fully sane at the time, and he was charged with assassination. During the sentencing, the court heard about several messages Singh wrote but never sent to Jasmine in the days leading up to her death. These messages contained statements such as, "Your bad luck that I'm still alive, just wait and see. Every one of them will get an answer, and deep inside what I feel but can't overcome." The prosecution informed the court that Singh downloaded a map of surveillance cameras across Adelaide the day before abducting Jasmine. Miss Mateo said that surveillance footage showed Singh purchasing zip ties from a hardware store on the afternoon of the abduction. She also mentioned that Singh removed the SIM card from his phone, placed it in another device, and left it at his home to engage cell towers that would create the impression he was at or near his home. He punished her, a defenseless, innocent girl, for rejecting him, she said. According to the prosecution, he forced her into the car, kept her on the back seat or in the trunk, took her a significant distance, ended her life, buried her, and disposed of any evidence that could implicate him in this crime. Judge Kimber sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His lawyer described the act as a crime of passion and appealed for a more lenient sentence, but the request was denied. Relatives of Jasmine, who was buried alive, were present during the sentencing. In her statement, Jasmine's mother welcomed the verdict. "Today I don't feel happy. I wish I wasn't making this statement and that Jasmine was still here with me," she said. Rashpal Kaur told the court she is haunted by the thought of what her daughter Jasmine Core experienced in her final moments. "I go through the terrible sequence of events, wondering when she realized she was in mortal danger," the statement read. "There was no one to save her. She spent her last hour on this earth with the worst of humanity. Jasmine is gone, and I am devastated with grief. She was a precious little girl." Rashpal Kaur stated that Singh was obsessed with Jasmine, who had rejected him 100 times. "She lost her life because Tarek Jot wanted to force her into marriage and force her into a relationship with him," she said. Mrs. Kaur stated she would never forgive Singh for what he had done. "Justice has prevailed, and I cannot express our relief. We welcome the sentence, but what I can say is that my family and I have already begun serving a life sentence, and we will have to spend the rest of our lives without Jasmine. Jasmine's employer and those she cared for described her as a beautiful soul who was kind, sweet, and attentive. Thus, 21-year-old Indian student Tarakjot Singh, who abducted his former girlfriend, 21-year-old Jasmine Core, from a South Australian nursing home where she worked in North Plympton, Adelaide, in March 2021, was sentenced to life in prison for a term of no less than 23 years without the possibility of parole. He bound her with tape and zip ties and then buried her while she was still conscious at Death's Peak near Hawker in the Flinders Ranges. Singh, who was 20 at the time, initially pleaded not guilty to the crime against Miss Core, but changed his plea a month before the trial in the Supreme Court. Judge Adam Kimber ordered Singh to serve a sentence of 22 years and 10 months without the possibility of parole, just slightly more than the mandatory minimum term for ending someone's life in South Australia, which is 20 years. While rendering the verdict, Judge Adam Kimber described the crime as horrific and extremely heartless, stating he was at a loss for words to describe the terror of Miss Jasmine Core's final moments. The terror she must have felt when she was abducted, tied up, and held in the car during the long drive to Morallen Creek is hard to fathom, said Judge Kimber. I cannot describe the horror that Miss Core must have felt when she realized that you were burying her alive. The court heard that Singh did not reveal details about how he abducted Miss Core from her workplace or what he did with her in the subsequent hours. However, Judge Kimber stated there was clear evidence that she suffered greatly and was forced to endure a long car ride while bound and gagged. After the sentence was announced, Judge Adam Kimber said it was clear that the crime was premeditated and that Singh took steps to conceal his horrific actions. The enormity of what you did must have been clear to you, said the judge. There was time to reflect. There was time to step back from the plan. Yet you proceeded and ended Miss Core's life. Judge Adam Kimber told Singh that he was, beyond any reasonable doubt, satisfied that the criminal was only concerned about himself. You ended Miss Core's life to punish her for her unwillingness to maintain a relationship with you and for turning to the police, he stated. The police had warned Singh about stalking in early February 2021, less than a month before the crime. During the sentencing, the court heard that Singh wrote several messages to Miss Core in the days before her death, which were never sent. At the trial, a statement Jasmine Core wrote to the police just 5 weeks before her death was read, detailing how her overly possessive perpetrator persistently followed her in the street and at her workplace. In the statement, signed January 28, 2021, Miss Core disclosed that she had been in a controlling relationship with Singh for about 9 months. He was overly possessive and wanted to control who I spent time with, the document released by the Supreme Court stated. Miss Core told the police that she ended the relationship on January 4, 2021, but Singh took it badly. He stated that I had to be with him, or else he would try to end his own life, she said. During their relationship, she mentioned Singh would sometimes get upset if she planned to go out with friends, calling her and demanding she come home. Singh, a citizen of India who came to Australia to study information technology at a university and who also worked at a nursing home, is likely to be deported once he is released from prison. Tarakjot Singh will be about 40 years old when he becomes eligible to apply for parole in January 2044. Jasmine Core became yet another victim of terror from a man, the attentive, sensitive, and kind. Tarakjot Singh, whom she loved and trusted, turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, and his pathological jealousy and emotional instability cost her her life. A person who truly loves can never harm their beloved. They would take any blow upon themselves. In the case of Tarakjot, there is no right answer. Some may see in this story an insult, some incompetence, and others might consider the guy a psychopath. But looking at Jasmine's story, one can learn, at the cost of her mistakes, to prevent themselves and their loved ones from making similar ones in the future. Jasmine Core's case is a heart-wrenching story of toxic obsession and crime that shook the Australian backcountry, following the disastrous end triggered by the boyfriend's reprehensible behavior.